So we'll just get into a dialogue. That means it'll be more free up, as we used to say in Vietnam. I'm going to read you something dated March 11th, 2002. The worldwide dragnet has snared 600 alleged al-Qaeda operatives, and yet the bottom line is sobering. After 6 months of gumshoe work by just about every law enforcement officials in the U.S., the number of al-Qaeda sleeper cells that have been busted inside the country is precisely 0. Does that mean bin Laden's men have gone further underground? We don't know, says an FBI official. If you go back and look at the hijackers, they had 0 contact with any known al-Qaeda people we were looking at. They didn't break laws. They didn't do anything to come to anybody's attention. Are there other people in the U.S. like that? We don't know. That was dated Time Magazine, March 11, 2002. Now here's the question. If they wrote that in March 11, 2002, on September 20th of 2001, right after September 11th, George Bush declared in his terrorism speech that al-Qaeda and the Taliban had to be removed from power in Afghanistan. If none of those people were identified, the hijackers, as al-Qaeda, then he couldn't, in September of 20th, charge bin Laden with being the culprit. All roads couldn't have led to bin Laden. So then there must have been some other reason to go in and remove the Taliban. Now, I've been arguing since September 11th that the reason was a pipeline deal from 1996 called the Silk Road Strategy. Now I'm not only convinced of that, but I'm convinced, and that's a proper political objective of our government, because our number one goal is strategic raw materials. Energy raw materials, especially fossil fuels. And I showed this little file, this is for the new people that are here. I showed this file to the audience on November of last year, because when I went back and did my research, I came up with a group of names of people who were on the USACC, U.S. Azerbaijan Chamber of Commerce. The Azerbaijan Chamber of Commerce at that time, during 1996, was the key to the entire Caspian region. That was the key. It wasn't Afghanistan, it isn't Saudi Arabia, it was Azerbaijan. It was one of the few countries trying to be a democracy, but mostly under the control of United States interests. That country was supposed to be the turnkey to opening up the entire Caspian region to oil and, of course, pipelines to transmit the oil. The Caspian region is landlocked. And what's important about this is there was no relationship with Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan. Afghanistan was not recognized. Those countries were landlocked with their natural resources, and they just sat there. Nothing happened to them. Our oil companies and our government wanted those countries opened up. The USACC is the company, or organization, Chamber of Commerce, that sought to produce that. On the Honorary Council of Advisors is James A. Baker III, former Secretary of State under George Bush Sr. Lloyd Benson, Senator from Texas. Zbigniew Brzezinski, National Security Advisor to Carter. Dick Cheney, who was Secretary of Defense under Bush Sr. and prosecuted the war in the Persian Gulf. He was then at the time the CEO of Halliburton, an oil company that also produces pipelines. Henry Kissinger, we all know who that is. Brent Scowcroft was National Security Advisor to Bush Sr. John Sununu was his Chief of Staff. That was the entire Honorary Council of Advisors. All of them, former government officials in 3 different administrations. 2 are now part of this administration. Ambassador Richard Armitage at the time was president of Armitage Associates. He'd been Secretary of the Army. He is now the president of and board of directors of USACC. He is now our Deputy Secretary of State under Colin Powell. Also part of it was Richard Pearl, who's the chairman of the Defense Policy Council, Defense Policy Board. He's the one hollering the loudest to go into Iraq. And here is our good friend Richard Pearl, is the son of James A. Baker III, James A. Baker IV. Now, all of these men have interest in the oil industry. During 1996, all they did, these was when they were private citizens, all they did is circulate the Caspian region and promote oil production, raw materials, and pipelines. The key pipeline runs through Afghanistan. Without that pipeline, they can't get the oil and natural gas from the Caspian region in the north. During that time also, members of the Silk Road Caucus in our government and members of the House International Relations Committee were also active. Members of the Silk Road Caucus, the region is called the Silk Road because of the old China Silk Road going to China. Silk Road Caucus includes Joe Pitts and Senator Sam Brownback. They're both on this list as well as trustees. These are the men also hollering the loudest for war with Iraq and war with Afghanistan. All of these gentlemen have interests in the region, financial interest in the region. In other words, when they go back into the private sector after they prosecute the wars, they'll go back into the private sector, be on the board of directors or the CEO of another oil company or a bank that finances it. They'll build pipelines and they'll get really bloody rich. Now, I don't have a problem with people getting really bloody rich. What I have a problem with is we have conflict of interest laws that preclude that. They're not supposed to do it. It's supposed to be illegal. They're supposed to be prosecuted. They should be in jail. That, of course, isn't going to happen. We've been doing it for 50 years. I'm going to explain something very quickly because without this, and this is in part for some of my clients that are in the audience. I'm going to read this. It's going to be a little boring, but I want you to pay attention. This was written, and it's a task force report of the Trilateral Commission, April of 1990. This is before August 2nd of 1990, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. This is April. The meeting was held at the White House. The conclusions of the meetings and the policy objective outline stated the following. When I say the trilateral countries, they're talking about Europe, North America, only Canada and the United States, and Japan. That's the trilateral in the trilateral countries. The trilateral countries could assist a possible peace process in the Middle East, as well as helping to reduce the dangers to their own interests deriving from the renewal of interstate conflict in the Middle East by pursuing issues of non-proliferation of chemical, biological, and atomic weapons and conventional disarmament in the region, as well as the limitation of arms sales to the area. Everybody's going to agree with that. In particular, the development both of nuclear and chemical weapons in the region would scarcely have been possible with access to Western materials and technology. That's significant. They're admitting that the weapons proliferation in Iraq, Iran, Syria, Israel wouldn't take place without Western materials and technology, mostly American. Peace and stability in the Middle East will be difficult to ensure without a major international initiative designed to undo this damage, an initiative which may now be more readily achieved by agreement between East and West as a result of a greatly improved climate of international relations. That means what they're talking about is just before 1980, the Soviet Union collapsed. So they weren't a major player in the Middle East any longer. So Western corporations and Western governments could then go in, create a hegemonic or hegemony in the region, and they could decide what they're going to do. This is the last paragraph. Accordingly, urgent action should now be taken to initiate linked nuclear, chemical, biological disarmament, control and verification measures in the Middle East. This matter is a matter which might appropriately be considered by the UN Security Council. That is precisely what happened after April 2nd and Saddam Hussein went into Kuwait. They went to the Security Council, got a resolution to go in, bomb the hell out of Iraq and get them out of Kuwait. But here's the point. The policy objective is to create an area in the Middle East which is in absolute control by Western powers and, of course, Western corporations. Now, I wouldn't have a problem with our government doing this to the degree that I have a problem, except that the people that are in our government are also the people in the private sector who gain from selling oil and gas, repair, wellheads, drilling equipment, pipeline equipment to those same countries. One of the persons that does it, and it's now public record, when he was with Halliburton as CEO through Dresser Industries and Ingersoll Rand, which was a subsidiary, Dick Cheney made a ton of money trading with Iraq. He's trading with Iraq during peacetime when he's out of government, and now after September 11th, he's saying he's a Hitler. Was he a Hitler prior to September 11th when you were trading and doing business with him and made millions of dollars? Well, we don't know. But I suspect that he didn't think he was a Hitler then. That's my problem with what's going on in the Middle East. And there's another reason. Saddam Hussein is still in power because George Bush Sr. wanted him to remain in power. He wasn't taken out. He could have been easily taken out if they'd wanted to. They didn't get rid of him because they needed a buffer against Iran. They couldn't leave Iran sitting there with their weapons and their power capability, because they would have taken Kuwait and Iraq, and if they could have, they would have taken Saudi Arabia. So we left Saddam Hussein in power. And here's the point. That means that when we hear people like Brent Scowcroft and Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld saying, we have to finish what we started in the Middle East, we let Saddam go, we didn't go all the way to Baghdad, they never intended to. What I am saying is then, and this is very difficult, that means the President of the United States is lying to us about the past, and he's lying to us about the future. Now, one of the big lies that has been swallowed by the American people, and they cannot stop preaching it, is that Saddam Hussein used chemical weapons on his own people. First of all, that's not true. Strategic Studies Institute, U.S. Army War College, all these three names on here, Douglas Johnson, Rosenberg, and a French name I can't pronounce, David would have to help me with that. Iraqi power and U.S. security in the Middle East. The study was done in 1990, before August 2nd, and they state categorically that Saddam Hussein never used chemical weapons on his people. The incident they talk about, the chemical weapons were used by Iran on their Kurds and the Kurds in Iraq, both. But the big lie, told often enough, becomes the truth. The other problem I have, and again, all of this is outlined in this book, substantially in this book, but I can't really promote this book too much because there's hardly anybody here, so what would be the point? George Bush is using Al-Qaeda and the incident of September 11th to create what sociologists refer to as a mobilizing myth. It's a myth. They're using the myth to mobilize the American people to support George Bush's actions both overseas and domestically. His TIPS program, Homeland Security, all of it is in fact stripping us of civil liberties, and a whole bunch of American troops, if we go into Baghdad, are going to die for the sole purpose of getting control of the natural resources. Now, it wouldn't be a bad thing for America to have natural resources, but to do what Bush is doing and not tell the American people what the purposes are, what the real reasons are, we're going to get blindsided as citizens. If we get bogged down in the Middle East, he'll have to institute the draft. The reason all these old retired generals are arguing for circumspection and not to go into the Middle East is the same reasons I am, but I take it one step further. Not only should we be very circumspect about going to war in the Middle East, let me give you a scenario. And this is what the old generals do. I know because during the Persian Gulf, I spent a lot of time with General George Keegan and General Westmoreland. We talked about Persian Gulf, what was going on. All of them, in fact, all 7 former chairmen of the Joint Chief of Staff, all of them told Bush Sr. we shouldn't go into the Persian Gulf. All of them. He didn't listen to anybody. The real problem about the Middle East isn't Saddam Hussein having nuclear weapons. He doesn't have nuclear weapons. If he had a nuclear warhead, he doesn't have ballistic missiles. If he had a ballistic missile and 1 nuclear warhead, Israel has 200. Who's he going to use his 1 nuclear weapon on? Israel? Israel would blow his ass off the map. It's not going to happen. The same principle that applied, called mutual assured destruction, the Mad Doctor that prevented the Soviets and the Chinese and anybody else from a first strike launch, is that deterrent. America has that deterrent. No one can take on America 1-1. So if we weren't afraid of the Soviets and we weren't afraid of the Chinese, why are we afraid of Al-Qaeda and one little tyrant in the Middle East who could be knocked off the map by Israel? Well, we can't achieve this policy objective, which was outlined in 1990, unless we follow through with the original objective, and that was to remove Saddam Hussein from power and disarm him, and Iran and Syria and any other country that we deem is too well armed. Are they too well armed for who? Israel? No. Israel has the 2nd best military on the planet. Other than the United States, nobody can touch Israel. even though they didn't do so well against the Palestinians throwing rocks and AK-47s. If we go into Baghdad, and this is just a hypothesis, maybe it won't turn out this way, maybe I'm wrong, Saddam Hussein will shoot himself 3 times and it'll all be over, but if we go into Baghdad, it'll be a ground war in Baghdad, house to house. Our military hasn't been trained for this kind of fighting. We haven't had any experience in this kind of fighting since World War II. We have no troops experienced in it, none. If we went in there, we would be fighting the Republican Guard, who fought 10 years of ground war, including house to house, with the Iranians. They know what they're doing. They're one of the most hardened groups out there, the Republican Guard, and they're in Baghdad. We never fought them in the Persian Gulf. They never left Baghdad. Anybody that says that we defeated the Republican Guard is not telling you the truth. They never left Baghdad. So if we go into Baghdad house to house, a bunch of Americans are going to die, and if Saddam Hussein thinks he's threatened, he will use chemical and biological weapons to defend himself. Wouldn't you? To defend yourself. If your country's been invaded, no matter what we think about our own country, if his country's invaded by our troops, and it looks like we're going to take Baghdad, kill his Republican Guard, and kill him, like Rumsfeld and Cheney have said they wish to do, kill him, then he's going to use chemical and biological weapons. So what do? What would Bush do if they used chemical weapons against our troops? What would Bush do to defend our troops?
He would nuke them.
He would nuke them
Yeah.
in a heartbeat. Only worst scenario is he might ask Israel to nuke them so he could stay clean. He might do that. Let Israel nuke them. But if he uses a nuclear weapon in the Middle East, do you think these group of hijackers, the 19 that had no connections at the time to Al-Qaeda, no criminal records, I refer to them as guerrilla soldiers. They're not terrorists any longer. It's evolved into something more complex. How many more guerrillas will enlist in their cause if we were to nuke Baghdad or take Iraq and destroy it? So what I see going on is we've got a president right now who's never had a job. He's never owned a company that his father didn't give him. He's never raised any money that his father's Rolodex didn't hand him. He's never made an investment that wasn't hustled. He never sold stock that wasn't a scam and SEC investigated. And the ranch belonged to his dad first. So we've got a little rich playboy who saw an opportunity to become a tyrant. And I'm not a Democrat. I really didn't like Bill Clinton. But the only thing that keeps tyrants from happening in this world is opportunity. When they don't have an opportunity, people who otherwise would be tyrants, and you've seen them in grocery stores, clerks, managers of hotels. That's all that's lacking for a tyrant, is opportunity. Well, Bush just got the opportunity of a lifetime on September 11th to become our first president to really start acting like a tyrant. And it is my duty as a citizen to dissent. It's not my right, it's my duty to dissent. It is your right and duty as well. Bill Maher dissented by saying that the hijackers were not cowards. Does anybody believe the hijackers that killed themselves flying those planes were cowards? No. They weren't cowards. They might have been nuts. They might have even been psychotic. They certainly hated America, but cowards, no. Bill Maher simply stated the truth. But whatever they weren't cowards. And Bill Maher got fired by George Bush and Ari Fleischer. They called Disney and got his ass fired. Nobody stood up for Bill Maher except me in Los Angeles. I did. I said some terrible things about George Bush at the time. I asked him on the media, please have Ari Fleischer call me. I would like him to tell me to be careful what I say and to shut up. Because then I would speak a completely different language on the phone. Now, I really am not, and most of my clients understand this now, I really am not an angry person about this. I really am taking it as my research and analysis into international relations. That's all it is a hypothesis. It's just my ideas about what's been going on, but I got a lot of background in it. I've done it for years, but that's why there's a question mark after my name, for those of you that haven't seen the book yet. The question mark is on all my books that I publish now, because I don't take myself that seriously. But even if something in my book is wrong, A theory is truly a good theory if it's falsifiable, according to philosophy. In other words, if it's detailed and coherent enough to find a fact here or something that doesn't connect, if it's falsifiable, then it is in fact a worthy theory. That's philosophy. There's probably something in here I will regret having written, but as of tonight, there's nothing I regret. What I do regret is that I had been scheduled to do an interview this afternoon at noon on the Dave Ross show. Brian Suits was sitting in, and he canceled the show. This is the second time Brian Suits has canceled a program with me because he doesn't believe I have the right to dissent. He doesn't believe the country has the right to hear my point of view because Brian Suits wants to go to war with Iraq. If you listen to him, he wants to personally go in and kick Saddam Hussein's ass, personally. Now, of course, Brian Suits is in the National Guard, and he's a second lieutenant, and his MOS, Military Occupational Standard, happens to be public relations. In other words, he can type really well and put together a nice press release. My MOS, on the other hand, this isn't bragging, I'm saying this for a purpose. My MOS, on the other hand, was 45J20. It was a 6-month school at the U.S. Army Ordnance Center in Aberdeen Proving Grounds, weapons and weapons systems. Vietnam, 1969 and 70. Yes, I saw combat. And this is the first time I've ever said it, and I'm saying this for a reason. This is for Brian Suits, and I hope somebody sends him a copy of this tape so he can shove it up his ass. My entire unit, the 2nd and the 17th Air Cav of the 101st Airborne, had their colors sent home. Does anybody here know what that means? The colors are sent home? It means your unit was decimated, 80% or more losses, there's no one left. Whoever is left, they're sent to other units, in country and out. My entire unit, 80% losses, A, B, C, and D troop. We got our asses whooped by a guerrilla army, just like the one we're facing now. In history, almost no guerrilla army has ever been defeated by conventional warfare. Either there's a redress of grievances, you find a compromise, or they win. They won in Cuba, they won in China, they won in Vietnam. It was a stalemate in Korea. We have not won a war since World War II. We did not win in Vietnam. Now, Brian Suits is real anxious to go to war. And on Mike Siegel's show here in Seattle, when Mike interviewed me, I quoted Erasmus, Latin, dulce bellum inexpertus. That means sweet as war to those who know it not. In other words, punk asses like Brian Suits thinks war is pretty cool because he hasn't got a clue what it smells like, looks like, or sounds like. He's what we would call, in Vietnam, in country, a cherry. The chances of him surviving 3 weeks were slim and none. He's just a loudmouth. And to prove that he's a loudmouth, when people called up, we found this out today because I went over to Elliott Bay Books for a book signing, and I signed books and gave a little talk over there. People came up to me, and they said that they called Dave Ross on the air. They tried to get on the air and say, well, you had Hulet scheduled, and we're sitting by the radio. Why isn't Hulet on? Well, everybody thinks that he probably just hung up, huh? You know what the son of a bitch said? I didn't want to put him on the air because we couldn't check out his credentials. My credentials? My credentials? He couldn't check out my credentials. He has none. He went straight from school, Washington State University. The only thing he's ever done has been a talk show host and in the National Guard. He's going to check out my credentials. So here's my recommendation to those of you that listen to talk radio. Call in on Brian Suits, call a station, and call him a son of a bitch. Because we don't need people like this. He's a little bitty baby tyrant in waiting. What would happen if this guy actually went into the regular army and became a colonel? You know what he'd do? He'd do what my major did in Vietnam. While we were getting our ass whipped in the A Shaw Valley, he was flying around in a chopper above us, throwing pamphlets down on the Viet Cong. They call them Chu Hoi pamphlets. Chu Hoi. That meant surrender. They explained to him that they would get, 1 cow and some rice and a hut if they surrendered. That's what he was doing. He got a silver star, by the way, after it was all over. He got a silver star. We got a bunch of dead guys, and he got a silver star. So, you know, I'm not disenchanted by my military and my government by accident. I come to this with a full consciousness and I understand what's wrong. I don't always know what's right. I don't profess to know how to fix it. That's why there's a question mark after my name. I don't have solutions. But I've been through a whole lot in 35 years. So it really bothers me a lot that when Bill Maher in a program like Politically Incorrect, that's the name of the show, Politically Incorrect, says something politically incorrect, is charged with being politically incorrect and fired. That's insane. Nobody stood up to defend him because we now have a country of bloody cowards. We have cowards. You know, why didn't David Letterman defend him? Why didn't Jay Leno? Well, there's a reason about Jay Leno. It's in this book. There's a section. Jay Leno's wife did nothing but promote administration. Her and a bunch of feminists did nothing but promote the removal of the Taliban from power because they make their women wear burqas, little black things. What Mavis Leno never asked anybody is, did the women want to wear burqas? And of course most of them do because they're Muslim. But Mavis Leno doesn't like it because she's a feminist. So, you know, it's very confusing and very mixed up, and it's going to get very ugly. And George Bush, with his Homeland Security, is taking away our civil liberties. He's rewriting constitutional law, federal law. The TIPS program would turn all of us against each other, turning each other in for nefarious activity, like being somewhat brown of color, possibly having a religion that doesn't correspond to Jerry Falwell's. One of the victories for guerrilla warfare, according to Che Guevara, to win their guerrilla war, he wrote this in his manual on guerrilla war. It's called On Guerrilla War. He said one of the ways to achieve the victory was to attack the infrastructure of the government, like of the United States, hit the Pentagon, hit the World Trade Center, hit the infrastructure of the government, and then the government would crack down, not on the guerrillas, because you can't catch the guerrillas. They disappear back into the jungle in Cuba, and in America, back into Tampa, Florida, St. Louis, and New York. You won't know them, you won't see them. They'll be having lunch next to you at a counter, you'll never know they're there. And they'll strike whenever they feel like it. George Bush, in his effort to secure the nation, will strip us of our most fundamental civil liberties. That's precisely what Che Guevara said was needed to happen to win. That was a goal, a victory goal. In other words, when we start losing our civil rights, the guerrillas are winning the war. So on Mike Siegel's show, I basically said, so therefore the only conclusion I can come to at this point is so far since September 11th, a year later, the guerrillas are winning. We're losing our rights. They haven't caught anybody. They haven't prosecuted anybody. We haven't been hit again. Where's the terrorism? But if you go to the airport and you carry a G.I. Joe doll with a little toy rifle, rubber one about this long, they won't let you get on the plane unless they confiscate it because it's a replica of an M16. This is normal. This is normal thinking. An old man opened up his wallet, and they were searching it, going through his wallet at the airport, and he said, what are you looking for? A rifle? They arrested him. Put him in jail for 2 hours. Fined him $78 and told him that he had violated their zero tolerance laws at the airport. This is normal. I spoke to 2 federal law enforcement officers in the intelligence division here in Seattle. They came out to my house. We talked for 4 hours. When they tried to get on the plane in Seattle the last couple of times, they were told they couldn't carry their Leatherman tool, little tool, because there's a little knife there. And they couldn't carry, the other one couldn't carry, he had a little knife that was fingernail clippers and files. He couldn't take that on the plane. They were both carrying .40 caliber SIGs. But they were told they couldn't get on the plane. And they actually had to stand there and argue with these idiots at the airport saying, hold on a second, I can get on the plane with this, a .40 caliber SIG, but I can't carry my fingernail file? This is insane. That's how bad it's gotten already. And I'm just telling you, it hasn't even started yet. You've seen nothing yet. If you've read the Homeland Security Act, and the act is in here, and I defined a great deal of it, they would like to enlist everybody from UPS drivers, truck drivers, everybody, and even pay senior citizens minimum wage to spy on their neighbors and see if they can detect the potential of terrorist activity, the potential terrorist activity. This is called Enhancing Neighborhood Watch. They did this in other countries. The Soviet Union did it. They were called block commanders. The Chinese have done it. Stalin did it. Hitler did it. Now Bush wants to do it. Does that mean Bush is Hitler? No. He's just a new and very different kind of tyrant in the making. Now see, I don't think he's going to succeed in all of these things. And this is what I tell every audience every time it comes up. I always get a great question from some little old guy sitting there in the middle of the room with glasses. Dale just saw one today. Very bright little man sitting there. He goes, yes, well, every empire fails, and these men aren't that smart, and they're not going to achieve those goals, I don't think. I say this to everybody that says that. We don't have to concern ourselves whether they achieve the goals or not. What we have to worry about is that they're stupid enough to try. And they're going to. Because they think, even though they're wrong, they think they're smart enough to absolutely control the entire world through the IMF, the World Bank, the United Nations, the WTO, all this bullshit they've been setting up for 50 years. They actually think because they have computers, technology, instant money transfers, satellite technology, Bill Gates, because they're just the brightest, cleverest, richest men that have ever been on the planet Earth, they actually believe they can do this. And they can't. But they will try. So to put it bluntly, and I don't have to be nice here, this isn't a big audience. I know there's nobody from the press because they didn't come to the press conference. So I can say this, we're fucked. We really are. Because there's no dissent. You know how I got on the Dave Ross show in Seattle? They quit interviewing me for 5 years. Dave Ross has never wanted me on the radio. Nobody in Seattle wants to interview me. Because I say these kinds of things, only I say I'm much nicer on the radio, a nicer person on the radio. To get on the Dave Ross show, I had to go on a KABC Los Angeles show and talk to the host in Los Angeles that I've been banned throughout the country for radio and television that I've done for the last 20 years. Radio shows and TV shows that have interviewed me 50, 60, 100 times. Some of them I went to their Christmas parties, met their moms, had dinner with them. They even played footsies with my press agent, Kathy, at the dinner table. These are the talk show hosts, And they are what they are, right? They stopped interviewing me, including Dave Ross. So the talk show host asked me to say, how many hours have you done media? I said, 10,000 hours. He said, hosts have stopped interviewing you because of this subject. I went, yes. You've been banned, yes. He said it was ego, and he asked me to name one. I named Dave Ross. I named Dave Ross on KABC, KLS, 200,000 watts. And that was a Monday morning, early in the morning. By 8 a.m. that very morning, Dave Ross's producer was calling me to have me on Dave's show that afternoon. In other words, it was extortion. I threatened Dave Ross that if he didn't interview me on this book, on this subject, I would just start naming Dave Ross all over the country for the rest of my fucking life. That's why Dave interviewed me. And then after that happened, of course, Mike Siegel was substituting, and Mike said, well, let's bury the hatchet, Craig. Let me do 2 hours with you. See what a class act Mike Siegel is? I got Mike Siegel fired 5 years ago. I got Mike Siegel fired 5 years ago. Because he was putting the militia guys on the radio and causing just a terrible mess in this country. And bringing him to town to give lectures and stuff. And he's just doing some terrible things. So, he got nasty because I said I named him on the Dave Ross show. As one of the guys that was helping to create this violent militia movement. I named Mike Siegel on the Dave Ross show. So Mike Siegel got angry that afternoon, put me on his show to defend myself, and I kicked his ass for about 20 minutes. And after I was done, Mike was fired within 2 weeks. But Mike is an intelligent man. He knows that this issue matters, and Mike was a lawyer, ACLU, and Mike and I do a good interview. So he called, we buried the hatchet. We did 2 hours in Seattle. Mike's no longer in Seattle, for those of you that don't know. Mike's history. Mike is back in New York. He called Thursday this week to interview me on his first show in Manhattan, in New York, in Manhattan, during drive time in New York, where the tower is. get to bitch slap George Bush in New York. Here's the point. I don't see anybody else doing anything about what's going on here. You know, I see some senators and congressmen whining and complaining and saying that, you know, Bush ought to obey the Constitution and that, you know, he needs to consult with Congress. You know, I see some old retired generals, many of them retired for good reason. And nobody's saying anything about the fact that George Bush has 3,000 Special Forces troops already on the ground in Iraq. We've already bombed Iraq, Baghdad. We've already taken out their anti-aircraft systems, and we're there with Turks and British. In other words, we've already invaded Iraq. While Bush is telling us, presently, as of today, that he will consult with Congress, although he says he doesn't have to. He will consult with Congress before taking any action in Iraq. When I told a law enforcement officer recently that I got this book signing at Elliott Bay Books, he emailed me back and said that that made me a BFD. I thought that meant a big fat dude. He explained that it meant a big federal deal. Being a federal law enforcement officer, you can't say the other word. It's a big federal deal. I'm nobody up here. You know, proof is that I used to pull 1,000 people. Look how tiny the room is today. And it's not a big conspiracy. Nobody's, you know, sent down a black book to all the media and banned my ass. What's taking place is that by and large, the American people, who are now into almost the third generation, have never seen war, never been to war, never been in the military, never been shot at, never truly been angry, except somebody might have broke their CD or something. And we're a country that at the same time, because of that, really, really loves war. Yellow ribbons, flags, like Erasmus said, sweet is war to those who know it not. So here's the other problem. Those of you that have shown up here, and almost as many showed up at Elliott Bay Books, shouldn't complain too much. If they were here, it'd be a full house. You're going to have to figure out what you're going to do personally. There's no figure out what you're going to do politically, because by and large, Brian Suits is right. I think he's a punk, and I'd like to be alone in a room with him, but Brian Suits is right. He's got it all on his side. She could shut me down, not put me on the radio, and his audience, by and large, is going to endorse him, because they like what he says. And he starts ranting on about killing Saddam Hussein, nuking them, kick their ass, nobody can touch America, the Iranians step in, will whip their ass too. He can go on and blow off like that all day long, and this town loves him. An awful lot of you are draft age. If this thing launches, they'll draft you until you're, well, if it gets ugly, they can draft you until you're 42. You could have 3 kids and be at Yale University, and if you're warm, they'll draft you. And for those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, during 1968 to 1973, every 4th person that was drafted in America was drafted into the Marines, not the Army, not the Air Force, the Marines. And when everybody finally figures that out, as they're going down the line, all in lines, alphabetically in line, when everybody figured out, you should have seen these damn fools trying to jockey for position, trying to count. Did I change position? No. As soon as you did that, there was a Marine drill sergeant standing right there watching. No, we really want you now. Look, if this country was invaded, and I said this on Frank Sontag and KABC in Los Angeles, I said this in the first half of September 11th. When you want to go to war, if you're anxious to go to war, enlist. Leave us out. If you really want to go to war, Brian Suits wants to go to war. He's already a cheesy little cherry second lieutenant in the National Wannabe Guard, almost an Army man. You know, if he wants to go to war, it would take nothing to go down and enlist. Just training, he's a second lieutenant. They're going to need a lot of second lieutenants. The life expectancy is about 6 weeks in combat for a second lieutenant. They die real soon. So I think he should enlist. But, you know, I'm not holding any grudges. I just hope he goes to Baghdad. Yeah, he was really, really rude to Kathy, too. That just, he was really, really rude. That's not necessary. I give you. So I'm gonna go straight from here and start taking questions because half the room has already heard almost everything I have to say on this subject because they're my clients, business clients. And there's a whole bunch of just already just sitting there just going, God, I've already heard this 20 times, Greg. Say something different. So I'm gonna take questions from them as well, so we can take this to a different level of understanding. Anything you want to ask me. That doesn't mean I have the truth. Don't ask me what the solution is, because like I said, there ain't no solution because there is no people. There's no people out here that gives a shit. If you few of you that come, you know, I even recognize a couple of you that I haven't done a lecture in Seattle in 5 or 6 years, and I can still recognize a couple of them. That's amazing. They still pop up out here. Anyways, so any questions, please? And we'll just take this wherever it needs to go.
At the risk of sounding like a poor man's Tom Clancy, one of the things that's always bothered me about the Gulf War was the premise on which we went in, which was, if I understand it correctly, we got fooled. Saddam Hussein was massing on the border of Kuwait, and we didn't believe that he was going to actually invade Kuwait. But our ambassador talked to him and gave him the score, but he somehow didn't get it, and he went in to Kuwait anyway. Question I had, is it possible, has anybody looked at this, that the Mossad came to George Bush and said, we're uncomfortable with Saddam Hussein, and we lobbed a missile in his country a few years back to do away with a nuclear plant, and we almost erupted that whole Middle East and the Holy War? And is there any way we can figure out how to neutralize this guy and keep everything cool in the Middle East? Has anybody looked at that?
Well, you know, some of what you just said did in fact happen. But George Bush Sr. was president then. George Bush Sr. spoke, everybody listened, even Ariel Sharon. What actually happened when Iraq massed troops on the border of Kuwait is April Glaspie, the ambassador at the time, told Saddam Hussein through Tariq Aziz, she said America would take no position on a border dispute between Iraq and Kuwait if Iraq were to do something. America would take no position. In other words, she gave Saddam Hussein the green light to go into Kuwait. That's very well documented. Why she did that? Well, she was under instructions by then Secretary of State, I believe, James A. Baker III. So what I think happened is this policy paper was written April of 1990 in a meeting held at the White House. The argument was that Iraq was the #1 country to be disarmed. They had to begin with Iraq, disarm him completely, destroy his infrastructure, and use the UN Security Council to achieve that objective. How do you get Saddam Hussein to do something so stupid that America could rally all of his allies, their allies, and go to war with Iraq? They sucker punched him. They told him we wouldn't do anything if you go into Kuwait because it's a border dispute. The reason Saddam Hussein wanted to go into Kuwait was Santa Fe International was slant drilling into Iraq from Kuwait. Slant drilling. Santa Fe International was the company that slant drills in, creates the technology for slant drilling. It's an American corporation out of Santa Fe, New Mexico, and subsidiaries all over the world. The board of directors of Santa Fe International, the wholly owned corporation of the Al-Sabah family, was Gerald Ford, former president of the United States, Roderick Hills, Carla Hills' husband. She was President Bush's then trade representative, Brent Scowcroft, who later became George Bush Sr. So in other words, another corporation that was making money, working closely with our own government, slant drilling into Iraq, suckered Saddam Hussein to invade Kuwait, gave him the green light, said we won't do anything. And Saddam Hussein is such an arrogant idiot and a tyrant himself, he actually invaded Kuwait and thought America would do nothing. He got sucker punched. But the reason was they already had a policy objective that they wanted to get moving on, and that was to disarm the Middle East. Because the Soviets were no longer in the Middle East. They had no power in Syria or Iran any longer. So we, America, and our allies, we could do whatever we wanted. You know, this is a terrible thing to have to tell the American people, because I'll quote Dean Picard, the head of the Nietzsche Society. In one of my other books, he reviewed it, and he said that Craig Hulet is in love with his country, and both his harshest critic and his best friend. He thinks I'm probably the finest patriot he's ever met, because, you know, I follow thinking of Mark Twain and Lincoln and Jefferson, and if my government starts steering the course away from a free republic and a democracy, we start drifting in an oligarchy where the rich get richer and the poor stay poor, and all of us sheep line up and go to war and die for oil and natural resources, then I buy my very nature, but all of you by your nature, if you care about the country or claim to be a patriot, right wing or left wing, must speak out. You don't wait for Dan Rabin to speak out. He can get fired. They can't fire me. That's why I can do this, but it's also why people like, you know, Brian Suits isn't going to interview me. The free speech that we have in this country is being violated by people not being allowed to speak out is voluntary. Nobody's made Brian Suits ban me from the media. He just doesn't want my voice heard because he wants to be the only one heard. So there's nobody less patriotic on earth than Brian Suits right now, who claims to be, you know, in the military to fight for his country. When your country goes astray like this and begins to foment wars for political, financial, and personal gain, like I said, Dick Cheney traded with Iraq from 1995 until almost the year 2000. He now wants to go in and take over Iraq and install somebody Dick Cheney would like to see as the president of Iraq. So just like what happened in Afghanistan, who ended up the leader of Afghanistan? A former CIA operative named Hamid Karzai that was a consultant to Unical. Well, who will be the leader of Iraq? Brent Scowcroft? Dick Cheney's daughter? Well, that's not really that far-fetched. He just created a post out of thin air at the State Department called Deputy Secretary of State for Middle Eastern Economic Development. The post never even existed before. And she's now in the State Department at that post. Where was she before that? She worked for Armitage and Associates. Richard Armitage, the director and president of the Azerbaijan Chamber of Commerce. You know, this is called conflict of interest, and yeah, you know, it's supposed to be against the law, but, you know, that sounds like such a silly argument now. But the problem is, and this is the part you're going to have to really listen to. This is the reason I'm a little unhappy about what's going on. I kind of get nasty sometimes on the radio and stuff, which I understand why they don't want to interview me. I don't believe Homeland Security is being developed as a cabinet-level centralization of police powers to protect the homeland from terrorism. I think Homeland Security is being developed. It has been a long process in the making. It didn't happen overnight. It had it in the works for a long time. I think it's being developed so the government can protect itself from the homeland. The American people finally realize that the economy's been tanked. Their IRA stinks. They're unemployed. They lose their homes, cars, businesses. They can't find a job. And some idiot wants to start a foreign war, and a way to solve unemployment and people in the streets protesting is institute the draft. Then they're going to have a real problem on their hands because the militia groups didn't go away. And there's a whole lot lot of young people that during the Persian Gulf War were only 20 years old, and now they're 32 years old. And, you know, Americans may be ignorant of what's going on, but all Americans aren't stupid. There's going to be a lot of pissed off people here pretty soon. And the law enforcement people I talk to, all of them are saying the same thing to me. This is going to get really ugly. And if George Bush centralizes his homeland security apparatus and takes ATF, Customs, Border Patrol, and Secret Service and puts them all under this homeland security, under his personal control, no longer the Justice Department, no longer the Treasury, his control, with his own appointed cabinet head, then Bush will have his own private law enforcement agency, federalized. And he can do any damn thing he wants. The two guys I talked to last week with federal law enforcement said, if it goes down the way I'm arguing that it could, if it does, there'll be 2 empty seats in law enforcement. They will resign before they become Gestapo. And there's a lot of good cops out there who are going to have to make the same decision. And it won't happen overnight, although in some cases, for some people, it already has. It already has. John Ashcroft, 3 weeks ago, it got leaked out in the LA Times. He'd already put out a proposal, John Ashcroft, Attorney General, already put out a proposal to create on abandoned military bases facilities to house illegal combatants, American illegal combatants. Well, I've had the good fortune and hopefully not bad fortune of knowing Ramsey Clark, former Attorney General, who's probably one of the finest civil rights lawyers, said properly, in the country. And Ramsey Clark explained to me that there is no such term in jurisprudence. Nobody even knows what this word means, illegal combatants. He doesn't know what this word means, and it is subject solely to the definition of the president. So he could decide, I'm an illegal combatant. I would disappear on a military base, no due process. I couldn't hire a lawyer. When I finally got appointed a lawyer, they would be monitored, and they could sit in and listen to everything we said. In other words, the Constitution just got thrown out. The Bill of Rights is history. And when I was at Elliott Bay Books, you know, some guy just didn't want to believe it. He had a little tissy fit and tried to, you know, argue, well, what civil rights have you lost? And everybody in the room just about wanted to lynch his ass. They were, you know, a little bit brighter than that. But, you know, his attitude was that of the old Hungarian philosopher. When they came for the Jews, nobody did anything. When they came for the blacks, nobody did anything. When they came for the Mexicans, nobody did anything. When they came for me, there was nobody left. This will start, for those of you that are white, and I'm putting this on a tape, so it'll be at least available to somebody that wants to hear this in a different format. Those of you that are white probably aren't going to have to worry too much initially. If you're of a browner skin and an unusual religion, your ass is grass. George would be lawnmower. And there's too many protests. Most people don't know this. Most people think the protests, the war protests during Vietnam, ended because of the left protesting ended the war. That's a lie. That's a complete lie. The war protests ended very incrementally over a period of time. By 1973 to 1975, there were no protests because the policy of the government was to draft the American people and send them to Vietnam in one-year rotations. Instead of sending an entire unit over, like every war is fought, in every military action in history, you send a unit over together. They train together, basic training, AIT, everything. Everybody goes over together. You fight until you win, and you come home. You get casualties, then you start sending people over every place. But the units go over together. In Vietnam, everybody got one-year tours, and they were sent home. They weren't sending you there to fight to win. They were sending you there to get your ass kicked. When you came home, you didn't feel like protesting. You didn't feel like protesting anymore. You learned your lesson. That's how they ended the war protest. One thing that was left was draft card burning. People that didn't want to be drafted. It was a draft protest. Would they do that again if we got bogged down in Iraq? Absolutely. The economy tanks and unemployment goes up? Absolutely. That's the best way to get the American they're jobless and protesting. Drafted. Any questions?
Yeah, if, Bush probably is gonna win this next time, if he doesn't, or in 2008, how would the character of this change if the Democrat was in? I mean, maybe fundamentally it doesn't change, but superficially, how would the character of where things are going change?
Well, if we had Al Gore would have a hell of a time pulling off the kind of cabinet that Bush Jr. has. I think Al Gore would have to really question whether he could go into Iraq because he doesn't have the caliber of people. He never would. The Democrats don't have that caliber of people. When I mean caliber, I mean, not just sophisticated, intelligent hard asses, but, money-rich men who have been in the industries for 30 years. There's no George Schultzes and Cap Weinbergers and Philip Habibs over there with the Democrats. So I think if Al Gore had won and September 11th happened, I think it would be different. That's not me endorsing Democrats, but I would say this. It would be really good for the country if the House and the Senate did go Democrat and not Republican. What do you think it would be like if George Bush has absolute control and the House and the Senate are all Republicans? A one-party system. When dissent is already almost not allowed. That's not a good prospect. But whoever were to replace George Bush, we would be better off with, Hillary Clinton? Now there's a tyrant waiting for an opportunity.
How would she run this?
Oh, she would do the same thing George Bush is doing. She's locked in. She was on the board of 6 major corporations, including Walmart. Walmart, non-union, low-wage, shitty benefits, largest corporation retail in the world. Walmart. She was on.
Greeting you at the door.
There it is. So Hillary's not who you think she is. So that's why I can't suggest there's a solution because I know that this election will probably be the second, third lowest turnout in our country's history. They're not going to vote at all. American people aren't going to vote. The only ones who are going to vote are going to be people like Hillary Clinton, George Bush, because they're voting to keep their jobs. All the people who work for Hillary, George, and the governor, they'll vote because they want to keep their jobs. Then there'll be some people voting that are on the other party that want those jobs. They'll vote. But other than those people wanting money and jobs, the American people aren't going to vote. They stopped voting 15 years ago. So how in the hell can you think George Bush is going to lose the presidential race? I don't see it. I don't see anybody that could even match him.
So the only thing that changes about this is the speed of the direction.
Yeah. Like Lenin said, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but you're still always moving forward. And that's one of the things I've explained for years. On the things that matter, there's no difference between Republicans and Democrats. On the things that matter. The things that don't matter, abortion, homosexual rights, these things, they argue about, they fight about because they don't matter to the empire. The empire doesn't give a shit about those things. They don't care what you do or what you are. As long as you get in line, work your ass off, pay your taxes, don't dissent, do what you're told. On the things that matter, GATT, NAFTA, World Trade Organization, interest rate policy, governance, corporate governance, all of it, they're in lockstep. Whatever Reagan started, Bush Sr. pushed it further, Bill Clinton signed it, it got passed under the Bush Jr. administration. Just everything, but it's always everything that matters.
The other part is just the Democrats being kind of a soft wing, a step back, a loosening of the noose, whatever. That's the style of it in the public.
Oh yeah, they have a different style.
In other words, the style.
Everybody felt better. When you got fucked by Bill Clinton, you felt better about it. So is that what you're saying? Because you're really pissed at Bush did it. Because he doesn't care what he does. He's got an attitude about it.
But there's this real sort of tender kind of, feeling about it when it's done.
Well, that's what Clinton always said. Remember, he said, "I feel your pain." Right. Yeah, but you were doing the pain.
Right.
So what went on 2 years ago with John McCain? What was that about?
Well, I don't have a problem too much with McCain if I believed John McCain would do the things he says he could do. Straighten out election reform, finance reform. He says he can do all of these things, and Ross Perot said the same thing. He can do all these things. I know it's gone much too far. How are you going to get a House and Senate to pass, for instance, campaign finance reform, when all the congressmen and senators are only there because Boeing, Weyerhaeuser, and Microsoft gave them millions of dollars to get there? Without it, they're not in there. If you cross the system will fund your opponent to the tunes of tens of millions of dollars to get rid of your ass. I know, I worked on campaigns. Bob Ripley, Jack is a decent man, but Jack Metcalf never spoke out once against this corporatism or this system as it is until his last 2 years when he didn't have to run for re-election. When he no longer had to run for re-election, he didn't need money from Boeing, Weyerhaeuser, and Microsoft. Then he hired me to write his speeches, and we kicked their ass. One of his speeches is in here. And he actually got a standing ovation, and 80 congressmen and senators contacted him and thanked him for all of his, his heart and his soul and his courage. And, I got paid like a couple thousand.
So why did McCain even engage in what he was doing? Yeah, I mean,
But to get elected in Arizona. Half the Congress does this. Look, here's 535 crooks and thieves in the room. But all of them have to run for re-election. Okay? 435 of them have to run for re-election every 2 years. So when a piece of legislation comes down, and they know it's going to pass, but they think their constituency would like to see them vote against it, they wait until they know it's going to pass, then they come out against it. They hold the Congress and make sure that now it's going to pass, right? So now I can protest to my constituents and say, this is a bad bill, it shouldn't pass. And they're heroes, they get reelected. The only reason they said it is because they knew it would pass. If it was contested, they'd be all over the place trying to figure out how to pass it, sign it, agree to it, and still tell their constituency that they tried to oppose it. That's the problem. Now, I said this 15 years ago in one of the first lectures I ever gave, and I was much, much, much younger then. And I said we basically had 535 cowards and thieves in the House and Senate. Well, now I can't even just call them cowards and thieves. They're way beyond that. Way beyond that. They be hoes.
Hey, but also,
I'm sorry, I apologize. There might be a prostitute in the room. But I want to offend you. I'm calling them congressmen. Now, I have absolutely no respect for the system because it's a lie. It's a big fat CNN soapbox bullshit lie. You're screwed, glued, tattooed, and ain't a damn thing you can really do about it except figure out how to survive it. There's only one way I know how to survive it. I don't care what happens, to be honest with you. I care that it's happening to you. It's not going to happen to me. They're not going to touch me. They can't fire me. They can't kick me off the air. They can't, garnish my wages. I don't make enough to worry about. I prepay my income tax. And I broke most of the time. So, I can say whatever I damn well please. The only thing they could do is they could put my ass in jail. And then I just give you guys a lecture because you'll all be there too. Still listening. Yeah, that's really screwed, isn't it? What can we do about it?
Hey, we
Not
got
a
pretty
lot.
young time in a cut. Can't complain about that.
Craig, since Iraq, Iran's 2/3 of the axis of Israel, and I know politically objective is to isolate Iran, Iraq from the oil markets. And now that, Al-Qaeda might be or could be in Iran, what's in store for these two countries?
Well, Iran has already mobilized its entire military, anticipating that if Bush goes in to take Baghdad, he'll move right on to Iran. Next stop, Iran. They've already mobilized their troops. But, here's an interesting aspect. This is just interesting. I don't know what this means, actually, but it's very interesting. Saddam Hussein and bin Laden hate each other. Al-Qaeda is the enemy of Saddam Hussein's regime. But there's Al-Qaeda with the Kurds in northern Iraq, and they want to overthrow Saddam Hussein. Our U.S. Special Forces are are working with the Kurds in northern Iraq against Saddam Hussein. Hello? The Al-Qaeda are our allies now? Or just some of them that are with the Kurds? That they're in Germany, they're bad Al-Qaeda, they're good Al-Qaeda if they're with the Kurds.
It's 1984 and all over again.
It is. This is getting kind of creep show like.
Was there Al-Qaeda before 9/11?
Oh yeah, sure. And there always will be. You know, they exist. Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda
I meant
exist.
the term, labeled.
Oh yeah, yes, absolutely. Yeah, they were there. I wrote a paper for one of my clients, a business client who's developing a shipping vessel project. I don't want to go into details. It's a startup. And I wrote the risk analysis for the corporation. And what I said in May of last year, May before September 11th, is that Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda had targeted American businesses, corporations, and here on our soil. And I said there was a real risk if you put this, basically what I said to him in private, was if you put this vessel off Genoa, Italy, and you're flying the American flag, I would sink it. If I was Muslim, I would sink it. It would take nothing to sink it. It's this big, dumb barge that's a shopping mall. We're going to take the American shopping mall experience to Italy, right, in the Mediterranean, in the middle of this. I'd sink it. McDonald's, Golden Arches, come big old Bon Marché floating in. I mean, it's not even a ship. It can't run. So I warned them that, you know, the risk analysis was enormous. They had budgeted, I believe, $100,000 for security, which would buy them, one rent-a-cop with no brains? No, I estimated it would cost them $1.5 million per vessel, and they'd have to be retired Navy SEALs to protect this vessel. And they wouldn't be worried about shoplifters either. But that's how stupid people are that want to make a lot of money. All they think about is the money. They don't think about security. They have no idea what it takes to do security and how many years you have to work in security, and the shit never hits the fan, but you got to be ready for it all the time. It's not a fun job. So I gave him to do they call it backhatting. I gave him Frank Thornton, the highest decorated Navy SEAL in American history, to do the backhatting. Backhatting is that Frank Thornton will come in with his team, and he will prove the vulnerability of the vessel's security. And it'll be a real embarrassment when he's through. But yes, Al-Qaeda exists, terrorism exists, it's going to get worse, but every Muslim terrorist doesn't have links to Al-Qaeda. This is what Bush is trying to convince us of. This. Every single Muslim they find that's doing something wrong, his INS, his papers, his visa is out, they try to find a connection to Al-Qaeda. This makes it look like they're after a true enemy of monolithic size. That's the mobilizing myth in sociology. If we didn't have a myth of the Soviet Union or Red China, remember it was Red China? Red China? Now they make teddy bears, and they're in the World Trade Organization. Now they're talking about putting them in the G9 and making it the G10, as if something's changed. How many of you heard me on Mike Siegel? Okay, well, that putz that called in was trying to pretend he was a terrorism expert and started reading quotes from a big book that he had. And I started asking him because, you know, I agree with everything he was saying about terrorism. I was saying that Al-Qaeda wasn't what he was describing. It's something else. And as I was trying to explain, I knew I was going to get nowhere, so I decided instead to find just how smart this guy was, and I started asking him a simple question. Those cruise missiles that were launched at Bin Laden by Clinton around 1996, I think it was, as Bill Clinton launched about 200 cruise missiles at this little caveman in Afghanistan, missed him. Many of the cruise missiles didn't blow up. They didn't go off. Bin Laden collected the missiles, and I asked this guy, who'd he sell them to? Well, you interrupted me. I had to ask him 3 times, and he wouldn't answer because he didn't know. Finally, Mike Steele came out, all right, just tell us, all right? China. China, our friend that we just had entered into the World Trade Organization, bought U.S. cruise missiles from Bin Laden. Bush was just over there 2 months ago, kissing the Chinese ass, because they're in the World Trade Organization and the WTO. So we've given them special trade status. They're our friend. They got our cruise missiles. They must be our friend. I'm sorry. They've got our cruise missiles. They gotta be friends. This is all screwed up. Any other questions?
Right, if you imagine a scenario where Iran and Iraq and Syria would ally and not just wait to get knocked
So
out.
I'm not sure that that hasn't already happened. If Saddam Hussein had anything to do with 9/11, if Mohammed Atta was an Iraqi agent and did in fact meet with Iraq before September 11th, then we're not after the right guy going after bin Laden. It is Saddam then. But Saddam's not crazy. He's not crazy. He would have done it with immense secrecy, and he would already have a coalition built. Before he would attack America, he would have already built the coalition that he knew was there for him. Iran, Syria, Jordan. In other words, and I didn't make this argument alone. There's a couple of retired admirals and generals that have made this argument. We could be getting suckered into hell.
Exactly.
Saddam and bin Laden could have set us up and tried to sucker us to go in there, thinking all we had to do was send in 250,000 troops. We sent 500,000 last time. Remember? To get them out of Kuwait? Bush is now saying we only need to send 250,000 because our smart bombs are smarter. I'm serious. Our smart bombs have got smarter in 12 years. So he only wants to send 250,000 troops. Well, some of the generals are going, wringing their hands, going, this is a really bad idea. Because we don't know if we've got any allies, first, and we don't know if Saddam's already got a coalition. We get our troops in there, look at the map. Look at Iraq on a map. You're surrounded. Syria, Jordan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and all the way up into the Caspian region. You get at the very top of it. When you finally get to the top of the Middle Eastern Muslim country, what country is sitting there? Russia. You think Russia's going to let America take over all of the oil in the Caspian region in the Middle East? We're going to at least have a Cold War of sizable proportions.
Well, you assume that all these leaders are Machiavellian at the core. They're not going to just sit there.
That's where Machiavelli got Machiavellianism, was the Arab world. He learned it from the Arab world.
They're not just going to sit there and get knocked off one by one.
No, they won't. No, they won't.
What is Saudi Arabia? What is
Okay, so let me explain something too. I don't like the leaders of any of these countries. You know, I've known too many expatriates, the anti-Gaddafi Libyans live here in Seattle. 2/3 of them have been my friends for years. These are good people. They're not fanatical Muslims. They're anti-Gaddafi Muslims. They want to go home and have a democracy, freedom. They want a piece of their country back. Gaddafi's a tyrant. So is Saddam. So is the royal family of Saudi Arabia. The Al-Sabah family of Kuwait have one of the worst Amnesty International records for human rights violations in the world. They traffic in little boys and little Filipino girls, slave traders. They're animals. Yet they're our allies because they cut a deal with the World Trade Organization for oil and gas. So we're constantly sponsoring tyrants in the region unless we suddenly want to get rid of the tyrant. You know, bin Laden was our hero when he was fighting the Russians for 10 years. We financed Iraq against the war in Iran. Iraq's military equipment isn't Russian. 1/3 of it's American. That's why we know so much about his weapons. We gave them to him and trained his army so they could fight Iran because Iran was backed by who? Russia. Now they're the enemy. Well, these people's countries and the people in them have been screwed now for 20 years of this game. And that's what it's been called. In the Caspian region, Afghanistan, it's called the Great Game. The British played it, the Turks played it, the Mongols played it, the Romans played it, and now we're playing.
How was Kuwait compensated for being a patsy in that whole thing?
They got a lot of money. They got a lot of money.
That's why they had George Bush Avenue.
Exactly. Yeah.
Suddenly build it.
I just want to add two things. First of
You
all,
can ask three if you want.
I just read the book from Zygmunt Brzezinski, The Ranch Export.
Chessboard.
And that was powerful in the museums. I mean, it's backed up in that book. It even has a map. This book was written in 1997. It has a map of circle of the Balkans, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, of the next conflict in America and India. And it has those countries circled. And it's doing well in second of all, I gotta stand up when I say this because, and I'm not meaning to steal your show by any means, I support what you're talking about, when you heard you speak once on the radio the other day, but, there is a solution to what you're saying in terms of getting this out to the masses.
Okay.
And the reason why I'm saying that is, a group that, Andre here and myself belong to, we'll go ahead and write it down, it's called Pinnacle Quest International. But, we market the freedom technologies that you're speaking of. I don't know if you've heard of Michael Rupert, who's joined us out of California, he's at narcs, narcotic, but this game you're talking about, it's deeper than just this one. It goes down from the money and debt, even to taxes that you're speaking of earlier. And there's help for both of those systems that we're living in. And, there is no money. And when I say that, there hasn't been any money since 1933 when gold was all back and doesn't back our dollar bills. And this world of commerce we live in, through education that you're putting out there with this, the door's wide open for us. We also know we're going into this thing. And we're in over 37 countries, we're about 100,000 strong in the United States and these 37 countries. And I'd like to speak with you sometime to get you more information, to get this information out there.
Well, I know exactly what you're talking about, the issues. I used to speak to those issues years ago, going back 20 years. And I probably got the best library in the Northwest on the Federal Reserve System. I have, in fact, I have an original copy of Wright Patman's study on the fence, which is brown cover and everything. I got it from Ron Paul. He said, "You keep this. I don't want it anymore." I spoke to those issues for years, and I actually introduced it 14 years ago on the Mike Siegel show here in Seattle. We did shows for 4 hours sometimes, back when Bush was calling it the New World Order. And then, I would define it. Mike and I got, rather popular in this area for doing it. But, it's getting harder and harder for, I have no problem with groups forming, but, to what end? I might even, come in and visit your group, but, to what end? What do you plan on doing? Because, you said it yourself, you said it since 1933, gold. Nixon took us off the gold standard, 1973. Mine was high thought, Harvard, silver, and that's partly why you got Watergate. Deep throat was Kissinger. Everybody knows this. So, he got taken out for the same reason Kennedy was taken out. When you start messing with the country's money system, you are messing with the true rulers. But it's not a big conspiracy theory. The people who actually control the Federal Reserve, well, Alan Greenspan just got knighted by the Queen of England. This isn't symbolic. The only other people who have been knighted is George Bush Sr. and Ronald Reagan.
I guess what I was saying is the same mission that the path that you're on is what we're directed on to as well with our group. And what I mean by group, I don't mean a group of people getting together and just talking about it. There's actual solutions. And the best way to help the poor is not be one of them. Bottom line. And when you understand how our economic system works, and we're not messing with money because for one there is none. We're dealing in negotiable instruments and commercial law. And as far as the federal income tax goes, when you run into the Federal Reserve, it's not federal, it's not reserve, it's not even part of the government, as you already know. There's a remedy for that. And that's what our group does have to offer. Because when we did sign the first 1040 income tax form, you open up a file on yourself. The IRS keeps, and unless you know what that file is and can read that file, you don't have a chance. So you just gonna line up.
Okay, well, here's my warning to you. Okay, I've known groups like this before. I've spoken. Ron Paul and I used to do the lecture circuits together years ago in Memphis and all over the country. I knew Red Beckman first and others. I do have one thing to tell you, and that is this. Those arguments are very old arguments. They're not new arguments. And I do know what your argument is. My problem with it is an awful lot of people that get involved in it. Well, let me put this differently. In 1913, everything changed. Foundations, IRS, Federal Reserve, everything. The corporations wrote the new tax laws and accepted themselves. They don't pay the same tax law system as you and I do, corporations. So I know foundations, I understand 375, two more big changes, and, you know, here we are. Now, here's the problem, as I see it. That means the problem we're talking about of what I now call the finished empire, they are building an empire. It's a corporate empire, and it's global now. And they're finishing up, they're putting the finishing touches on it. The vast majority of Americans don't have a clue what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Okay? But the government has moved completely past it. We now have, in a very real sense, I don't know how to put this down. I'm probably going to use words that are slight exaggeration because in oratory, sometimes you have to exaggerate to make your point, but I don't want to soft sell it either. I believe that we have, at this point, a criminal government. Completely criminal. From the top down. Right down to some of the mayors and the police chiefs, okay? We've got a lot of people who stand to gain by this system going forward and just leaving behind the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. These are unnecessary impediments to an oligarchy. And that's what we have as an oligarchy. We have the very, very rich in absolute control. The same guy that's on the board of directors of Bechtel is then Secretary of State, Vice President. When he leaves that office, he goes home, he's on the board of Bechtel. Everybody understands this now to some degree. At least everybody in this room should. But the vast majority of the American people saying, you're nuts if you talk this way. And George Bush, if he achieves his objectives, he will try to succeed by any means necessary. So the problem with your solution, the only kink in your armor is your numbers and the fact that you can be easily alienated by the government and the media.
You can see that by the definition of 802 domestic terrorism.
And, that's right, and they may just decide that you are a threat to the system. So if you don't rule out defending yourself, you're just setting yourself up to be taken out. And one thing I can't do is, see, I'm trying to get myself far enough along. I want to get on Larry King, you know, once, and be really nice. The first time, I mean, just be nice and cheerful and amazing, and do a really fine job, and then he'll have me back. And then I'm going to say what I want to say, after I set his ass up. But that's me personally, that's what I'll do, because I'm willing to risk only myself, nobody else. And this government is capable of, and you know, let me just put this very clearly, the woman that was the head of the Green Party can't even get on a plane in this country, simply because the Green Party is part of the WTO protest. And Bush decided that she's a threat to the country. She can never fly again. Well, I've been doing radio and television since September 11th, like clockwork, mostly in Los Angeles, but I'm going to be doing Manhattan Tuesday, and I just did Seattle. You know, it's not inconceivable that when I go to the airport the next time to get on a plane to Los Angeles to go do a lecture, I won't be allowed to get on the plane. So we're already planning that if that were to take place, I'll have to, you know, go to the airport, you know, two or 3 days sooner so I can drive to LA and do what I need to do. Be Catholic on the plane, but it isn't inconceivable that if this thing gets ugly, they could also house my ass in a facility and say I'm an illegal combatant. Because by opposing Bush, I'm opposing his war on terrorism. And Bush is talking that he has declared war, that we are at war. Even though we haven't had a declaration of war, we are at war. So by opposing Bush, it could be construed that I am aiding and abetting terrorism. So, you know, I just want to make sure everybody understands that I know what you're doing, and I respect it, and I agree with the philosophy of it, but it's in the doing of it. I will say one thing about Michael Rupert. Michael Rupert gets a lot of facts right, but his interpretation is sometimes really off the wall. So I take a real close look at his analysis and his interpretation. And as far as his police record in Los Angeles, somewhat inflated. He's pretty not much not who he says he is. So, you know, I'm not sure he's the best thing to have on your calendar.
I just mentioned that one because you said you were talking about it. So I'll do that now.
Well, I know Michael Rupert pretty well through Frank Sontag and Frank Adams, and he asked me to check him out because he was getting a lot of media in LA, and he threatened Frank Sontag, a host of him, threatening him to beat the shit out of him. Because Frank wouldn't interview him. Frank wouldn't put him on the air. He just went ballistic. So I did check him out, and I don't know, he's gotten real popular, but the level of conspiracy theory he touts is pretty bizarre. So I would just, go with caution.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
On the Mike Siegel show, you talked about something, and I was actually driving down the road at the time, and you talked about the way, at the time that planes were in the air, somebody called on
It's a landline
secure,
to the White
to a
House.
secure number. And I was trying to follow some of the details of that, and
All the details are right here in this book for only $29.99.
Okay. And, you know,
He said there's nothing wrong with making a little bit of money.
But, okay.
All right, I'll take
I'll just
exactly what
find the
happened.
book.
William Sapphire wrote it up, verified it. Dick Cheney was grilled and finally admitted it, that they got a phone call while the planes were hitting the towers. The person that called, they knew it was a landline domestically. He knew codes and procedures that only the Secret Service would know. So they knew somebody was on the ground and knew more than any terrorist could know. Which indicated, that was one of the things that indicated to me that we're not dealing with Al-Qaeda type terrorists. We're dealing with a more sophisticated, better trained, with military intelligence capabilities. That's a guerrilla army.
So you go into the book where you think they got this, might have come up with this information?
I go about as far as I just said. And then I explain what a guerrilla army is and where they would come from and why. See, what these guys have just described is there's a lot of internal dissent in America right now. It's pretty hidden. And the government doesn't pay any attention. But it's also in the black community in LA, Farrakhan, militia movements, rural communities. There are all kinds of groups forming, including some farmers groups about exactly what you talked about. And they've been there for 50 years. Except, they're armed and dangerous. They've actually, killed bankers. And
Well, this isn't very scientific, but I noticed when I listened to C-SPAN early in the morning, just listening to people talking, and probably, it appears that among the black culture, that they seem to be the most unified in terms of their
They're the ones that are going to get stepped on
push.
first.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
they're the most consistently anti-Bush.
Well, actually, one of my clients is Wall Street. He's well known on Wall Street. He's very respected, SEC license. And he's got about 40 clients. All of his clients voted for Bush. Now, all of those clients are calling him saying, the guy's lost his mind. Bush is nuts. What the hell is he doing? He's destroying the country. He's destroying the economy. He's going to go out on adventurous wars like Caligula to defeat all enemies that he finds. And, everybody's saying he's going to destroy everything. He's crazy. I'm like, what are you talking about? He knows exactly what he's doing. Everything that he's doing is just not in your interest. He knows exactly whose interest he's in, what he's doing, and in whose interest. That's why I always put it in this book, and every book I put that phrase. There's always a chapter with that as the subtitle or the text. You have to look at in whose interest Bush is doing what he's doing. No government does anything by accident, and no government does anything without a clear purpose in mind, and there's interests involved. What Bush is doing is not in the interest of the United States, or the American people, or the citizenry, blacks, white, green, pink, lesbian, gay, it doesn't matter. He's not doing anything in the interest of us, but he does have an interest in mind. GE, Bechtel, Weyerhaeuser, U.S. Home, Boeing, Chase Manhattan, and yes, the privately owned, for-profit Federal Reserve System. Absolutely. The most powerful man in the country is Greenspan. He's the most powerful man. That's why the son of a bitch won't resign. The only time this guy will resign, unless his crown gets too heavy. In fact, I've already told all my clients is to pay attention to Greenspan. The day Greenspan resigns and is replaced, the shit's going to hit the fan. He is not going to be on watch when the economy goes. He likes being on top, looking like a star, even though it's bullshit and speculation.
The mine canary.
What's that?
The canary they put in the mine, when he dies.
Greenspan. Listen to that. He's the canary.
seem like the 600 plus people they have locked up in Guadalcanal. It would seem that if they were who they claim the government claims they are, it would be in the government's interest to publicize who they are, and you think that they're all Al-Qaeda, all released.
Well, slowly but surely, they're getting released. Federal judges are intervening one at a time, 3 or 4 at a time, and they are being released for lack of evidence. They are being turned loose. Most of the people that they collected, they are claiming that they had something to do with Al-Qaeda or September 11th, have had nothing to do with anything. Their only mistake is that they're Muslim and they were in the wrong mosques, or their visas were expired.
I guess my point in that statement was, it wasn't clear to me that they were all Muslim.
No, they're not all Muslim. They're not all Muslim. And we're going to find out soon enough that when Bush extends his war, it's going to include all people. Anybody that gets in the way.
Well, most Americans are.
No, for instance, North Koreans are not Muslim. All the Chinese that were involved with bin Laden were Chinese. Most of them had been Buddhists or atheists or communists. You know, it's a broad mix of people that are pissed off at this empire. They're not all Muslims, and not all Arabs, and not all Persians. And all Persians aren't Arabs, and all Arabs aren't Persians. And all Muslims aren't Muslims. All Arabs aren't Muslims. Some Arabs are Christians. You know, Bush is making a very good effort and a successful effort at confusing this so large that when I get on the radio, with Mike, if I get a good show and it's a good host like Mike, the audience, I suspect in the first half hour, just go into shock. The only reason they can't turn it off is they can't get off the couch. But I know they don't like what I'm saying because it's so comfortable. It's got to be bin Laden. And like I told this group earlier this evening, you know, part of the reason Bush does this is Americans are so ignorant, and many of them are stupid. That's not the same thing. But they're so ignorant that they have to have a face on it. Bin Laden's got a great face. You put that face on a poster and say, that's the enemy. Americans love that. 80 million Americans lining up going, absolutely, we got to stop these Al-Qaeda terrorists. They didn't even know what the word was before September, 20th, when Bush gave his speech. They didn't even know what that word was. Most of them spell it wrong still. And they couldn't find Afghanistan on a map. But what does any of those things matter? Those things don't matter. It doesn't matter to Bush. All he's got to do is get the lemmings moving in the right direction. Once he's got them moving in the right direction, nothing is going to be able to stop him. That's my problem. Nothing's in its way. And whoever gets in its way, you know, you better be as prepared as I am for Bush taking issue with it. Bush isn't Bill Clinton. This is a different man. And we're not dealing with George Bush Jr. When you see that little geeky face with his little pointed up little ears, his little smirk on his face. We're going to go against the Al-Qaeda, the evildoers. And he gets a little smirk on his face because he knows he owns everything right now. He can't be touched. He speaks and does ad-libs, and the progressive left goes, he's so stupid he can't even pronounce potatoes. You know, he doesn't have to try.
Yeah, but
He's the president that he can ad-lib, make mistakes, he doesn't give a shit. He doesn't have to. He's the emperor. He ain't just the president. And who's he got behind him? His dad. That's the man.
Craig, is there any hope in the fact that the polls are saying that his ratings are dropping so much? Is there any hope in that?
Yeah, but you know how they turn the polls around? Invade Iraq.
yeah,
When I went up a minute ago, they were announcing that Americans, announcing that Americans find Mars in Iraq. They just don't want casualties.
America likes clean wars. Very clean, tidy wars.
what did you go to?
I love
Yeah,
hamburgers.
clean wars, tidy wars, clean wars. They only cost $100. Tidy wars.
The radio would see what's in the They're also setting it up. They're also setting it up that Iraq is provoking us in the no-fly zone. So we're almost held to the one. So we did about.
That's a
lots
That's
of
right. They saw the old pictures.
I have a question about Saudi Arabia. Is it at all probable that Saudi Arabia and the royal family could get so upset with something that we would meddle in over there that they would yank their billions of dollars in investments out?
already doing it.
Uh-huh.
Over 300 billion have already left the country. And the problem is they don't know how many billions it actually is. The estimate in 1990, which is the reason we went in and protected Saudi Arabia and Kuwait to begin with, is we have to support them at all costs because the liquid assets that they hold in our banking system would cripple the banking system if they exited tomorrow night. They've already taken 300 billion or more out. They've already done it.
So hence George Bush's meeting with Saudi princes.
Yeah. George Bush and the Saudis are close personal friends. You know, this is something, you know, the American people aren't catching this because you read the American newspaper. I don't read American newspapers. I read them sometimes for a little comedy relief, but I don't take them serious. I read, you know, British, German, French newspapers, anything I can get my hands on, Arabic newspapers. I subscribe to the Caspian News Agency, and every single time, like the Al Sabah family or the Saudi regime, the prince, you know, they come to America, the first place they go in the press releases overseas is Houston. Not Washington to see President Bush. They go to Houston to see President Bush. And they spend 4, 5, 6 hours, 3 days at the ranch. They go on an Amtrak train, private cars with George Bush Sr. They spend 15 minutes with Bush Jr. He doesn't matter. He's the president that is just up there to sell it, to pitch it. What's going on is George Jr. All of his cabinet are George Sr.'s people. You guys have any idea who Richard Armitage is? Okay? Deputy Secretary of State. That's why Colin Powell isn't resigning. Colin Powell should have resigned a long time ago by the way he was treated by Rumsfeld, Cheney, and Bush in public. They've dissed his ass terrible. He should have resigned. And he's the only one that has suggested some intelligent thought into all of this. Now he doesn't speak at all. He doesn't say anything. But the reason he doesn't resign is if he resigned, Richard Armitage would walk right into Secretary of State. Richard Armitage goes back to Vietnam as a drug trafficker, CIA. He lied and told the world that he was a Navy SEAL. I know personally that he never was in the Navy SEALs because I know Captain Larry Bailey, who taught at the SEAL School for 26 years. He also was identified by Kuhn Saw in a videotape that Bo Bryce gave to Ross Perot as trafficking drugs in Vietnam, and also had authored the policy for the Taliban and Afghan Mujahideen to produce opium to destabilize Russia as a weapon in that war. That's who Richard Armitage is. Colin Powell hates him. General Westmoreland hated him. Keegan wished he was dead. Ross Perot got that tape, went to the White House. Now listen, Ross Perot took that tape with Kuhn Saw to the White House because he helped put Reagan in the White House. He's his biggest donor. He took the tape to the White House and wanted to demand from Reagan that Armitage be removed as Secretary of the Army because of these charges, and that he should be indicted. Armitage was removed because the damn fool went and talked to George Bush Sr. first, Vice President. George had his ass removed, physically, in an arm lock, picked up, thrown in a limousine, and told, don't ever come back here, you're not welcome.
Ross Perot.
Ross Perot. So what happens when you piss off a little Texas billionaire? He runs for president and removes your ass. That's why Ross Perot ran for president. He didn't want to be president. He took out Bush Sr., gave us Clinton. So why is he silent today? Why is Perot silent today? Anybody? Other than clients that I've already talked to about this. Why is Perot dead silent today? He doesn't have leukemia.
Does he have a piece of it now?
No.
Is he scared?
George Bush Sr. sold Zapata oil for $2.5 billion. George Sr. isn't in the White House. You mess with George Jr., George Sr. is going to kick your ass. So, you know, I've had this comment in a couple of emails and letters every once in a while. You know, why don't you hook up with Ross Perot? I think it'd help you get your message out. No, we won't. No, we won't. In a very real sense, it's kind of over in a way. personally survive it if you think it through, behave properly, take the right precautions and tactics. You can survive what's coming. But by and large, for the average American, it's over. They're going to get stomped. And they'll probably do something stupid like hook up with somebody that absolutely believes that they can fight a revolution. We'll lose. Then we will lose the country. It's simple math. We haven't had now almost 3 generations trained to do anything military. You know, they think they're badasses because they can kickbox. Women think they can kick ass because they can kickbox. They jog. We don't have a country that if we try to take on the 101st Airborne and Marine Recon and Spec Ops and SEALs, we'll get stomped. I'm just telling you, we'll get our asses whooped. So I don't recommend anything violent. I recommend getting goddamn well educated, figuring out how best you can survive, and try to get the hell out of the way of this train. And get your family and friends and whoever you care about out of the way of the train. But it's gone on now since 1913. This isn't new. And that train is like, you know, you said on that silly tape of George Bush, Elliot, you did, the train's moving. When you can't jump on it, you're already off it. So it's going to do what it wants to do, and it's going to go where it wants to go. And there really isn't anything you can do to stop it. What you can do is what this gentleman suggested. You can find out what the hell's going on, take precautions, do the right thing. I would suggest, you know, being debt-free completely and having 6 months cash sitting around. And I've already made a list of all my clients on this, by the way, so that they already know this. But, you know, actually what's going to happen to the country, it's going to happen what's going to happen because the American people have given up a long time ago on government. They don't vote, they don't care. Most people agree with Brian Seuss, not me. When I went on the radio, most people listening agree with Brian Seuss, not me. I'll find a small minority of people that are going, something's really screwed up. And then they'll come here or buy the book or something. That's it. I've been doing this for 20-some years. It's not like I'm lacking an understanding of my own culture. I understand the culture. The culture's given up. They've quit. The people have quit. There, that's a good, upbeat, positive note to
Take a break. Just take a break.
take a break. That's what I should do, take a break. What is it? Yes, take a break and I'll come back. And think of some brilliant questions to grill me with or something. And I'll be right back. Oh, no, unless you pay me to be fine. Yeah, you really think I can use it? I'll just tell you in a broad stroke what I've done with some of the clients, business clients and individuals. I just look at some of their financial situations and suggest a way to correct the problem and where they should be going given what's happening in the country. And obviously it's things like, you know, stay out of debt. If you've got credit cards, don't use them. Pay the IRS. That's where I'm going to part company with these three gentlemen here. Because, you know, if you are dealing with a criminal government, if you think you can break a criminal government's laws to beat the system, you're making a terrible mistake. They will either arrest you or shoot you. It's not worth the risk. Now, if I thought there were millions of intelligent people in this country that would listen to the argument about the Federal Reserve, the banking system, the IRS, the fact that corporations live by a separate set of rules and taxes than you and I, and the wealthiest people don't pay any taxes ever, you know, because of the way the rules are set up, and of course the wealthy set up the rules. But if you think you can break the rules and somehow not pay taxes by some scheme, you're going to go to jail or be dead. But sooner or later they'll catch up to your ass. When you're fighting a criminal government, there's only two ways to do it. You either get rid government, it's by, consent.
What about the electoral college? What's it, you know, I mean, they didn't do away with that after Bush got elected, so.
No, but, you know, the problem isn't that, it's the American people themselves don't vote. The only people that do go to vote, by and large, are people that already work for a governor, a congressman, a senator.
Right, right, but I mean,
They're voting for their own self-interest.
what, okay, you vote, I mean, still, it's electoral college, is what they go by.
Right, well,
Because, you know, the American people did not vote for Bush, the majority did not.
well, you know, that, when you say the people, you know, I look at the electoral system right now, and I don't vote any longer. I gave it up myself. I quit. Simply because there's no possible way I'm gonna vote for a Republican who's a crook or a Democrat who's a crook. Both Al Gore and George Bush are crooks. We got 535 crooks in the Congress and the Senate. So, you know, arguing that, you know, Bush stole the election or, you know, actually more people voted for Gore, these arguments are a moot point because you only had two choices to begin with, and they're both crooks. So, you know, fixing the system, or like John McCain, campaign finance reform, you can talk about it till you're blue in the face. Who's going to vote for it? Who's going to vote for it? All the senators and congressmen, all are in office because they get money from the largest corporations. So I don't know what the answer is, other than informing the rest of the American people. But I don't see it. You know, if we go to war with Iraq, they'll just start bringing out yellow ribbons again. They'll buy in lock, stock, and barrel, bring out yellow ribbons, and Bush will get reelected because he's a war president.
What about the economy though? Usually that puts in the toilet right there.
What economy put who in the toilet?
His daddy was a one-termer.
No, his daddy was taken out by Ross Perot. His daddy would have trounced Bill. Without Ross Perot, we would have still got George Sr. So you can't remind people enough of this. Bush Sr. wasn't taken out by Clinton. Clinton didn't win the election. Ross Perot won the election for Clinton. 29.5% of the vote in 37 states. Those votes came from George Bush. And he did it because there was a little Texas feud between him and George, and he got some revenge. But still, it took a billionaire. Now, if I was a billionaire, I could give you some answers. If I was a thousandaire, I could give you some answers.
Given the fact that, I guess you proceed on the premise that generally speaking, the press, we don't get the facts from the press. One of the things that I was always confused about, and maybe you have an insight on this. The American Spectator magazine in June of 1999 did an extensive article on W's finances. American Spectator isn't exactly, I mean, certainly his credentials are not liberal. And it was a huge indictment of the way George Bush has made his money, George W. Bush made his money. And they outlined, and I remember the last line from this bastion of the right wing, the American Spectator magazine, said none of this has really come out, but if George decides to run, it will, and implied that it would affect his popularity. Never came out. Never heard anything from the Gore campaign. Never heard anybody taking what I thought was just bullets in the Democratic Party's gun. They never did anything with it. It was never mentioned.
I did.
You read the article.
Big so what, you know? Well, I collected a lot of the data myself, including all of his contributors and where they got their money and all of that. But, you know, the problem is well beyond the solution categories, in my view. Okay, years ago, I would, you know, tolerate a question and answer period about, you know, campaign finance report and all the rest of it. It's not going to happen. We now have a criminal government. It's just that simple. And we're gonna have to figure out how to live with it and survive it. You know, if it means you've gotta come up with an ideological slant, like these gentlemen that were sitting here, you know, I don't have a problem with it, however you choose to do it, but understand it's a criminal government. So you're gonna have to figure out how to do it, and like I've always argued to my client base, I live a moderate poverty. As Ralph Waldo Emerson recommended, he said, if you want to be happy and live in a country like this, there'll always be corruption. The government will always be corrupt. Law enforcement will always be a struggle of good cops and evil cops. So try to find some good cops to have a relationship with. One of the gentlemen working security here, he's a cop. And he's a good man. You know, he hates George Bush, and he thinks 535 senators and congressmen are crooks. That's why he's here. And there's a lot of good people out there, but if you think somehow there's enough of us that care, you just haven't been doing this long enough. I've been doing this now almost 25 years, but I've been self-employed 32 years. And I was even active then when it was in my raw self-interest and greed, the first 13. But I can tell you that the numbers have dwindled. And whoever comes to this meeting, if there's another speaker in town on a similar subject, it'll be the same people. They all go from one meeting to the next meeting. They all join the same groups. So the numbers are so small on both the left and the right, and they hate each other. The left and the right hate each other, so you never get the left and the right together. How in the hell are the American people going to get together to solve anything? And first of all, second of all, or third of all, I'm not sure which it is, there's so much bigotry and hate in America that it's hard to get a group of people in the room where everybody at least agrees to disagree. It's almost impossible. There's so much ideology in this country, and it's an ideology that Karl Marx called false consciousness. It's a fucked up ideology. It's a screwy way of looking at the world. It's very self-centered, and it makes you, paranoid. It corrupts your own cultural concepts to where you look at other people that aren't like you, and they're the problem. When the fact is, most of the time, the problem is the government. The government's the problem. It's not the solution to anything. It's always the problem. But if the American people choose to not vote and not care about the issues and let the government handle it, what am I supposed to say? Stand up here and say, join this group or listen to them talk about the Federal Reserve? My God, I've talked about the Federal Reserve my whole stinking life, and in private with my clients, I still talk about it sometimes. But, you're not going to abolish the Federal Reserve. You're not going to slip the IRS. You're not going to get us back on a gold standard. It's finished. It's over. It's not going to happen. So why would I, waste my time knowing that after doing this 25 years? I think it's great that they're educating themselves. And if you're not educated on it, you should, about the Federal Reserve System and the banking system. You should educate yourself on it. It's one of the only ways to survive is by understanding. But for me to stand up here and say, well, I recommend that, we take part in their seminars, I'd be asking you to go over ground that I've already covered and I know won't work. It's not going to help. It's not going to fix what's wrong. Understanding it, yes, you need to understand it. I recommend that. But, I've heard it for 20 years, 30 years.
Craig, we have a gentleman that's here that might be able to even shed more light on trying to get people motivated and do things, and that's Don. Don. You could address some of this, right? You've been out there, I know you've been out there a long time, and you try to do a lot with getting people organized and
It's one thing to try and get people organized, but Greg's right. People don't listen. People are not interested. I invited 4 people to come with us, and I came along.
right, that's typical story.
Well, Don, it's good to meet you. I didn't know that's who you were. Hi.
I tend to go with the people.
Well, the proof is that I'm sitting here, most of the people in this room are my own personal clients. I've been doing this now 25 years, pretty solid, and I believe the client base now comes from 5 different states in the United States. They flew from 5 different states, parts of the United States to come here to do a business roundtable with me and come to this. occasions, we'd all go to LA and there'd be 300 people in the room. If I did Frank's show, we could possibly get 300 other people that we don't know in the room. But I also know this, once that 300 comes to a lecture, they will not come to the next one. They will not come again. They will come once. No matter what's going on, they won't come a second time.
Why do you suppose that?
It's they have to commit. Once you expose the problem to them, they have to commit to both understanding it, reading, understanding it, and possibly doing something in their own personal life to change their own lifestyle. And they're not willing to take that extra step. They don't want to know anymore. They just came because I was, they heard me on the radio and I was fascinating, intriguing,
Provocative.
captivating. Those are the words they use. When they call Kathy, they say, oh, that man, his name is Kurt Hubert, and he wrote The Hydrant of Carnations. He was fascinating. Oh, wait a minute, the book's $29.95? That's too much.
Is there any precedent for what we envision here, which is that people will, sort of snap out of this state and sort of take an interest in constitutional forms of government and all the rest of that? Is there any?
Now, you mean like in this period of history right now?
Well, is there any historical precedent?
No.
So this would be the first.
If they were, you mean to suddenly wake up and take an interest, it would be the first time in world global epochal history, yes, it would be the first. And it's not going to happen. Let me assure you, it ain't going to happen.
Okay, so what?
These people are going to go to that football game, baseball game tomorrow. That's it, man. I heard him talking. They're already sold out. 67,000 seats.
Still on.
It's on the bar.
It's still
The
on.
game is on, yeah.
But
The game is up.
Those sports figures. Those sports figures are like gods. I don't understand it. I don't have television. I don't even know who they're talking about. They talk about the names of these people that are getting all this money. I don't even know who they're talking about anymore. I'm so old. I remember like Roberto Clemente. I don't know who these people are.
Craig, I have a question though. Now it's not possible, but is there something that, people are getting their lives together to try to weather this? Is there something to do in terms of the future? I mean, maybe planting some kind of seed that maybe in 20 years or 30 years, is there something to do now? And,
From a communist.
well, no, I don't mean that. I mean just.
No, you need to planting a seed differently, Dave.
Oh, no. No, that, you remind me what I was talking about?
Elliot, that is what I'm doing.
Right, that's what you're doing.
So that-
But
so-
others, I mean, that.
I don't know.
Oh, right, that's the point, right, why not
That's
think
the
of
point.
something instead of like,
Well,
well, Craig, thanks for the research and tell me what to do. Just do everything. Right.
Call me when it's done.
Call me when you figure it out. Oh, doing $29.95, that's too much. And that? Okay, so that's a good question I should ponder. Very good.
It was a self-answering question.
It's a self-answering question.
All right, so some of the people that aren't familiar with our roundtable groups, this is Elliot Cavi, Elliot Umberto Cavi. He's our resident entertainment factor.
One of the problems with the general population today starts with the educational system. When the kids are being taught in school, starting in kindergarten, the educational process which precludes them from being able to reason. The whole purpose of education today is to keep the kids going on into adulthood on an emotional basis without having the knowledge to be able to take information and reason. That's the problem that we're facing. I can see it in my kids, and you will see it particularly in the younger kids who are being taught in the school system. That's also one of the reasons why system in horseman back in the 1870s and moved forward. Then you get into Amsterdam. One Italian anyway, he was in a very plush Italian prison. Came up with a way of destroying culture. Destroy the culture as it exists and supplant it with the one you want. This is what has been going on. This is why it's real hard to get people to pay attention as to what's going on. They're deadened, they don't care, they're so busy in their everyday lives that they can't focus on what's actually going on.
Then why is this young man sitting right here?
He's a failure.
Well, you know, I will agree with, in part, some of what you said, in part, some of what you said, but, you know, the culpability rests with each individual. And I went through the public school system. I flunked the public school system. I flunked everything. I mean, everything. Well, no, art. Oh, I did, well, I flunked art too. I did the paper mache thing. You know, I went through the public school system, and I saw how ridiculous it was and absurd. But, you know, nobody dumbed me down. Nobody told me to think one way or another, because I simply refused to be told how to think, what to think, where to go, what to do, period. But I didn't need to be a criminal to be that way. I just needed to be belligerent. I didn't speak in high school for 3 years. I just didn't speak. They go, you know, Michael here, George here, Fred here, Craig, Hulet. Is he here? Is he here? So we go, he's here. I wouldn't even answer. I didn't speak. Simply because I didn't choose to be there. It was prison. I'll educate myself when I damn well please. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. So, you know, that may be an extreme version of being able to survive the public school system, but, you know, that extreme version also gives you some insight as to what's wrong with these people. You know, nobody's dumbing these kids down. They're perfectly content to be dumb, all by themselves. They like it a lot. That's why their vocabulary is about 800 words tops. They like it that way. I don't know why they think it's cool, but if they all think it's cool, even if you were the best teacher in the world, you wouldn't get through to them. It's already a cultural standard. I mean, like, okay. I don't know why they talk like that. I call to do business somewhere, somebody answers the phone, they go, hello, like, okay, what? Like, okay, what? And why do they talk so fast? Why does everybody talk so fast? Call California, how fast they talk. Why do they talk so fast? I can't even understand. It sounds like one of those commercials where they deliberately talk really fast. Well, they're just normal people. They're just...
Give me a premise that, you know, the people at the top, the wealthy people, are the ones pulling the strings, which sounds pretty persuasive. What's going on with Enron now? What's going on with Walcott? How come they're hanging these guys out to dry? They're part of the good old boys, right?
They didn't make the payoffs.
Well, you know, they screwed up. They got caught. It happens. There's good cops. There's good SEC investigators. You know, even the rich and famous can still get caught. But my guess is that some of them were not politically connected.
They weren't important.
They were not important enough. You know, if you're playing the game the way the Rockefellers play, and you're not Rockefeller, and you're not connected to that brotherhood, then sooner or later they're going to take your ass out. You don't get to play unless you're one of them. It is a system. A system. It is a brotherhood.
They're gonna take their ass out anyway, Paul.
What's that?
They're not going to do anything
very likely most of them will walk away scot-free. And even if they do get convicted, they'll be pardoned by Bush in 2 years and nobody will even hear about it. They'll be buried in the Wall Street Journal. That's the point. We have a criminal government and the criminal elite run it. We're not part of it, and there's no way you can get in. If you're sitting in this room, you'll never get in. There's no way in. There's no way in. And if you were in and you got out, you never get back.
And so these corporate regulations that are going to start changing, is that actually going to benefit the upper elite?
Yes, yes. They'll change everything in their favor further. Nothing's ever going to be changed in our interest. It's not going to happen.
When you were talking earlier about the Middle East and the Caspian region and the enemies that are kind of flipping sides, you know, they're kind of with us and they're not with us. You were talking about the oligarchy. Does that matter to them, or are those just like these little?
No, they're all on.
It doesn't matter, does it?
No.
Just if you go this way or that way, but no matter what, they're still going in this direction.
Right.
Right.
And they have contingency plans.
So it really
They
is.
worked with Bin Laden until Bin Laden wouldn't work with them. So, you know,
It's irrelevant then.
if you think about it, from a governing standpoint, if you were part of the government and your interest was identical, that's the problem, is their interest as governing, their governing interest is identical to their self-interest. So what's in your interest isn't in the interest of the government, and if you oppose it, you're opposing their self-interest. So in other words, everything they do, they benefit personally, and so they design a governance to go in a direction that benefits them personally. It's identical. Their self-interest is identical with their personal interest.
That's why Bush's, when you said someone was confused about Bush and saying he's crazy, it actually is very, very clear and starkly clear what he's doing when you look at it from his point of view and his self-interest.
You know, I wanted to get on that guy's talk show and see what the hell he would say when I handed him that. The Azerbaijan Chamber of Commerce is the Bush administration. They're the same guys, the very same guys. All they did when they were with this little outfit was lobby in the Caspian region to turn it into a great big development project for Halliburton and Exxon, and then build pipelines all over the place and seize control of everything. That's all they did from 93 up until almost the year 2000. In fact, they've got their resignation date. Dick Cheney resigned in November 2000. Why? Ran for vice president. Yeah. That's when the decision was made. But he stayed right up until November of 2000. And where's Armitage? When did he resign? February 2001. He didn't know he was going to get the appointment until later. It's so bloody obvious what's going on. And then when they leave office from here, I'll go back and I'll check corporate records, and they'll pop up at Exxon, Bechtel, Wirehouse, and Boeing.
So government is just another shift in their gear or their car they drove or whatever, and then they shift into this, but it's.
Well, let's be honest. If you were rich and powerful, what would you do?
I wouldn't do
Really?
that. I would be good.
That would be good. No, you see, I don't look at it as I don't look at George Bush personally and say Bush is bad, Scowcroft's bad, you know, Kissinger's bad. I understand human nature too well. Most people are envious, not upset that these guys are taking the country away and destroying the Constitution. Most people are just envious. Oh, God, I wish I had went to Harvard, got on the board of Exxon, and be Secretary of State and shit. That's all they complain about. They just bitch about it.
So what does it mean that some of Daddy's former cabinet people are coming out and sounding like they're dissenting about the war?
That's the best smoke screen I've seen in a long time. There's no dissent. There's no dissent. It isn't a coincidence. It looks like it really is like discourse is happening. And now George Bush Jr. can say, well, you know, I don't agree with them. They have a right to their opinion, but at least we've got discourse. Right. Every one of these guys, in fact, it was was reported in the Wall Street Journal, they asked a financial analyst, what did he think about Scowcroft, Lawrence Eagleburger, Zinn, and who's the other clown? Baker, right? All of them from Bush Senior's cabinet coming out saying, well, we ought to think about going into that Iraq. They all just happened to coincidentally do it over about 7-day period of time. All of them wrote articles to major newspapers, all went on the Sunday programs, all over the week. But see, the American people don't know any of those guys personally. They don't know who Lawrence Eagleburger is. They don't know that Eagleburger, Kissinger, and Scowcroft all work at the same company called Kissinger and Associates. They don't know that. Because they don't know it, they think it's three different people just out of the blue coming out of it's George W. It's perfect smokescreen. It looks like we're having a discussion in America. It looks like Bush is getting advice. It sends a signal to the Middle East that we haven't decided yet to go into Iraq. We're in Iraq.
They're not that naive. The Middle East, they know.
No, of course they know. They're not fooling Saddam Hussein. They're not fooling anybody. But it wasn't to fool Saddam. It's to fool us. To make it look like we've got a discussion going
They're
on.
pretty naive to think that Bush Daddy's cabinet would come out against Bush.
Nobody would cross Bush Sr. Not on their life. Literally. No way.
So
There was no discourse going on.
So dissent coming from respected red area parts of the world of people like Chuck Hagel, who I saw this morning, basically voicing his concern and
Senator Byrd did as well, yeah.
But, I can see how they can neutralize Byrd because he's a Democrat. But Chuck Hagel's Republican. And he's from Nebraska, where Bush is
Right, and
supposed
what
to
about
have
Dick
some-
Armey? The other one was Dick Armey. We used to
Yeah.
call them the Texas Rangers. All of Bush's boys in Texas were given high posts in chairmanships in committees. When you see a smokescreen set up like this, I don't listen to any of it because even if they pretend and seem to be saying something that they really agree with, they have to run for re-election. They've already polled their constituency in their district. If it looks like they've got a district where a whole bunch of people are starting to oppose this war, Chuck Hagel's going to sit there and he's got to make a choice. If I want to get reelected, I got to look like I'm saying, well, we better think about this war because he's got a constituency that's going to vote for him. Okay? But the truth is, he knows nothing's going to change, and Bush is already in Iraq. You didn't see Chuck Hagel say, I'm opposing Bush's actions and invasion of Iraq now. He's already invaded Iraq. He didn't say that. He played the game, but we're still discussing whether or not we should invade. He didn't say we were already there. So therefore, Chuck Hagel lied. It's a lie of omission, but it's still a lie. Why didn't he say we were already in Iraq? We've already bombed Baghdad. We've already taken out anti-missile sites. We've already seized 3 airstrips. We've already killed X number of Iraqi troopers. Why didn't he say that?
Say what?
You're talking about as a continuation of the Gulf War or a recent one?
No, we're there now, today. We've been in Iraq for months. Just in the last few weeks, we have been bombing Iraq's military sites. 3,000 special forces are on the ground right now with Turks and British troops. They seized 3 airports that I know of. They were praised in some of the tech journals because it was the first time they found out that we have a smart bomb laser technology that can take out fiber optic systems. They're sitting around going, wow, this is amazing. We didn't even know that technology existed. It's great. Chuck Hagel doesn't know this. I'm not Nostradamus. I'm not the world's greatest researcher and analyst. If I know this, Chuck Hagel knows this. He's got a staffer that does nothing but military issues. He knows this. The staffer has already been briefed. Chuck Hagel knows we're already in Iraq. Why didn't he say we're already in Iraq? If I get on Larry King, if I were to get on Larry King, that's what I would have done. I would have set Larry King up and got Larry King going in a long conversation about, this person is saying that, we shouldn't go into Iraq, and we've got Scowcroft arguing. Do you think Bush is going to take this advice? No, we're already in Iraq.
Larry King is live.
Jason,
What do you think about the deal Russia just cut with Iraq?
$40 billion 5-year plan. Well, Egypt cut a $40 billion plan, October of 2001, and barely made the press. Same thing, free trade agreement between Egypt and Iraq. The whole world's been doing business with Iraq.
You think it's they might have some military? Because it's obvious Putin and Russia has interest in the oil too.
Well, that's why I said in the book that the book which is only $29.95. That's why I said I fear that George Bush may be walking us into another Cold War with Russia, because every move that George Bush has done, like putting Hamid Karzai in Afghanistan, and within months he cuts a deal with a memorandum of understanding to build the pipelines through Afghanistan. The Iranians immediately get with the Russians and the Armenians, and they build the pipeline going the same direction into Pakistan. So it's a big chess game. And Russia's right smack in the middle of it. Russia has done nothing but hold summits every 3 or 4 months with all of the Caspian region states.
And China too, right?
And China too. China's going in there building hydroelectric dams and agricultural projects. China's doing what we ought to be doing. They're trying to build up the nation's infrastructure. They're doing everything right. We're the ones going in saying, fuck the people, take the oil.
So
China.
isn't there a conflict there between China and the US and Russia?
Well, there is a conflict. That's why they're doing it. That's why China's going in and building the infrastructure and helping the people. They want that region on their side. See, the region sits on a map like this, metaphorically. A map like this. China's here, Russia's here, sea's over here, pipelines go this way. Well, China's negotiating pipelines to go east. Russia's negotiating pipelines to go north. Iran is negotiating pipelines to go south. Every move Bush does, they're countering it. All the nations. That's why I said, if Bush keeps going the way he goes and goes in and attacks Iraq, we're going to find ourselves smack in the middle of another Cold War with Russia and China. These two giant countries are going to not going to sit back and let the United States, which isn't even on the continent, come over there, seize all the natural resources, decide who gets a pipeline that Dick Cheney's Halliburton can build, and which direction it's going to go. That's not going to happen. But you're damn well going to try. That's exactly what came up. Remember at Elliott Bay Books a little earlier today, some guy said, well, that's just stupid. These guys aren't smart enough to do that. Well, you don't get it, you know? It doesn't matter whether they succeed. The problem is they're going to try, and they think they can do it. And then we'll live with the consequences, and our children will live with the consequences.
How long do you think Karzai's gonna last in Afghanistan?
Well, you know, they're shooting Americans right and left over there now.
Yeah, we're gonna wait a little while, maybe a year.
They've
or
already
so.
tried. They've already killed 2 of his people and top people, and there's been a half a dozen attempts. But you know, right now all they got to do is hold Kabul. They don't have to control Afghanistan.
I'm wondering,
They're a long ways from a pipeline.
I'm wondering if he wanted that job.
Well, he was CIA.
Yeah, but I would have to think that
I don't think that
he's gonna, it's only a matter of time before he gets assessed.
No, you know, guys like that live in a very risky life anyways, you know. What was his choice? To keep running restaurants in Chicago and San Francisco? That was his life. Him and his brother run restaurants. You know, they stopped killing people and killing Russians and, you know, working with Bin Laden. Now he has to run the country. I think he probably made a pretty good deal. There's no opposition. He doesn't have to run for re-election.
I need to wind up in the next few minutes, because I need to get a new date set for tomorrow.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about the whole, what appears to us as theater between Pakistan and India? What's the underlying?
Power and 1,000 years of hate. Well, yeah, in a sense it is. You know, most of the world's cultures are still considerably more primitive than anybody wants to admit. The problem is we're going in there and trying to them to run their countries according to the IMF and the World Bank, and they can't. The only way they can succeed is the 10% get rich and the people get poorer. But, you know, nobody's becoming more civilized in the world. It's getting worse. It's going the other way. No. No. No, never. Intel, Microsoft, Cisco would all intervene and say, stop that. That's the center. India is the center where technology is. I mean, you can't have a war. I mean, Intel would just have a fit. Yeah. This isn't about countries and nations and people. It's about corporatism. It's about corporations. They run the world. They decide which country prospers and has jobs, and they'll decide, you know, if they don't like it in Pakistan, they'll move to India. And if they don't like it there, they'll go to China. But in the end, there's no geography, you know. O'Brien's book, Richard O'Brien's book, Financial Integration, I quoted in my book, The End of Geography. There's no geography left. There are no nation states. They're like little cities. They're like Minneapolis and Little Rock. And we're the cops. If the gangbangers in Little Rock get out of line in India, we send intel over there and go, look, you want to work? You want a job? Shut up and sit down.
Would that same dynamic work?
No, we can't dictate to China and Russia. No. No. But that is why they're trying to get rid of Saddam Hussein in North Korea and Iran and Cuba. Is we can't take them out. But we can't dictate to them.
To what extent, though, are there understandings or attempts at least to negotiate differences and interests in that area with Russia and China?
Well, that's interesting because that's the thing that I think is going to ultimately be the empire's demise. They actually think they can trust the Chinese because the Chinese will sign a treaty or a contract or a deal and let Boeing move over there and build everything. Once we move over there, Boeing leaves Seattle and all the plants are over in China and they got people working for 11 cents an hour. China will seize the property.
Is it because they're in the WTO now? Is that what gets
so? It's so stupid. They because these guys are so deluded. That's why the second subtitle of the book, "The Delusions of Empire," that's what's going to bring them down. They haven't solved any of the problems in the world. They're trying to overlay this corporate empire over an existing mess of countries that have benefited nothing. Even like India, where all the technology is moved, these people are working for shit wages. They're not getting anything from it. Intel is. And as long as Intel can persuade the government of India to behave itself, then everything's fine. But at some point, you know, the people will get sick of being shit on. And they're going to do something about it. And it'll be bits and pieces. You know, and as soon as something erupts in India, like if something erupted in India right now, and there was riots and trouble, and they killed the prime minister. Ooh, wait a minute, got a better one. They kill a Gandhi. They kill a Gandhi in India. You know what George Bush will be on television saying? Well, we found out that there was an Al-Qaeda cell in India and killed Gandhi. That's what he would do. He would blame it on Al-Qaeda. Everything's going to be blamed on Al-Qaeda now. It's really a very simple and easy and brilliant formula. You understand? Almost everybody believes it. You guys are sitting here kind of being a little bit smug tonight, I must say. You are. You're being just a little bit smug because you think you're just a little bit smarter. You're just going to go, ha ha ha, I'm not fooled by this whole Al-Qaeda thing. Everybody else is. How's it going to help you that you ain't fooled? We're fucked. We're running around going, oh, I don't think there's an Al-Qaeda like George Bush says. Smack. That's why I said it on Frank's show. I couldn't make the point. I did, 9 shows back to back from September 11th. How many shows, Jason, exactly?
8, maybe?
Thank you. He's my dummy man. And I finally realized that last interview with Frank, I realized that I know I'm not making the point. The callers are calling in, and I'm not making the point. So I finally said, Frank, this is for those of you who haven't got your dubbed copies of the interview yet. I said, debate technique, a debate tactic. In oration, you use it. You exaggerate to make a point. You slip in something that's not quite true, it's an exaggeration, but it's the only way to make the point. And Frank said, okay, I got it. And I said, there is no Al-Qaeda. Frank was quiet and went, wouldn't that be something? That's the point. There is no Al-Qaeda the way George Bush is saying. It's a myth to scare the shit out of American people and move them around on a chessboard wherever he wants to push us.
It's also ends, they can fight terrorism.
Yes, it's an endless. Well, it's not actually as good as the Soviet Union because we could spend a whole lot more money defending ourselves than the Russians. But it's not bad. It's not a bad mix. Because it's real flexible. Anybody could be Al Qaeda. You could be Al Qaeda.
Well, given the fact that you, I don't think, are suggesting that the Bush administration was behind 9/11, how were they planning to pull this off before 9/11 dropped it in their lap?
It would take a long time. Very long time. But the policies were already there. All the policies for the Caspian region, the policies for Iraq, the policy for homeland security, all of it was already there.
But he would have had to get elected.
Yeah, he would have to get elected.
And I think before 9/11, that was in question.
No, you know how hard it is to take out an incumbent president? Well, actually, we do know. It costs about $3.5 billion. It's going to be attempted. It's almost impossible to get rid of an incumbent president. He can start up wars. We could have riots. We could have all kinds of cataclysms, you know, so he can get reelected. It's hard to get rid of a president once he's in. And it's even hard to get rid of a president's vice president after 8 years. That's why we got Bush Sr. after Reagan. They own the podium. I guess I'm wondering what your point is.
Well, I guess I really didn't have one other than the fact that
It
it just was kind of reiterating how, in my opinion, in order for George Bush, who should be managing, if he wasn't born on third base, he would maybe be managing a Walmart in Beaumont, Texas someplace.
And Ronald Reagan had Alzheimer's for how long, we wonder.
Yeah, well, so I'm thinking to myself, how did this guy ever become the president of the United States? What stars had to align? What Powerball odds had to come together that this guy got elected? Because even with all the political power and money that he had behind him, I look at this and I think,
Look at this. This is how I do. This is how I do analysis. Once I got my research lined up, this is what I do sometimes. I do things like my hands are the Muppets. I look at it like this. Look, what if we took every single American and made them vote? Made them vote. They had to vote. They had, with a gun to their head. You have to vote for either Bush or Gore or Perot. And they all voted. How do you think it would turn out?
Gore.
So did you just answer the question?
Well,
We got Bush because nobody fucking voted.
well,
All right, here's another way of looking at it.
we got Bush, and I
Alright.
guess I'm agreeing with you, but you know, this is a guy who came off an economy that was doing well. You're talking about the perceptions of people. We were in surpluses, we were at peace for 8 years. All those
That's
things.
why nobody voted.
And then all of a sudden, we got a guy who can't even carry his home state, nor the state of his running mate, the president, Bill Clinton. So, you know, Gore had a lot to do with George Bush W. getting elected. I mean, I don't know how you fumble a ball like that, you know? But he did. He managed to, you know? And all the things that you're saying about the W, I agree with. But I just don't, what I find most bizarre is that he's there.
It's an enigma. Wrapped in a ribbon. Well, you know, it doesn't surprise me or shock me or anything tell me it was gonna happen, because of a crystal ball. It's because I understand George Bush Senior and power. I knew that George Bush would never go home and write his memoirs. He would put his son in power. He could have taken advantage for what happened. And nobody's gonna fuck with his son. So, I got a lot of clients that are going, well, don't you think George W. is gonna lose the race? I've gotta see something come along pretty drastic that George Bush Jr. won't have handled by the elite. A war, whatever it takes. George Bush Jr. is gonna get elected. George Sr. is today the single most powerful man in the country, next only to his knighted partner, Greenspan. But Greenspan doesn't have the kind of power Bush has. Bush is, right now, our oligarch. He's the man, Bush Sr.
Right.
Precisely, okay, the next one. And he's not who you think he is, you should hear Elliot just does an imitation of him. And Elliot learned who George Bush Sr. really is from me, because I knew George Sr. when I had my company in Houston. And that man you see up there, that Pee Wee Herman routine, that's bullshit. That's not the man. Man's a motherfucker. He'll whip your ass.
Well, he's the ex-head of the CIA. People don't point that out.
Yeah, since '54, since Yale. The guy's a motherfucker. So I don't see any evidence to suggest that anybody can defeat George W. to run for the president. I know Ross Perot was down for that. He's not going to help. Who are they going to run? Hillary? Well, she's thinking about it. That's how desperate they are. But you know what? The other point is this. And all the times are really sick of hearing this. It can always be a whole lot worse. George Bush is not the worst. There's worse things than George W. Really? I can't imagine. Well, think about James A. Baker III as president. Richard Armitage as Secretary of State. Richard who? It could get a lot worse.
Well, one of the ones that's kind of intriguing is this, they say they're trying to frame him as this unlikable, arrogant East Coaster, but one of the guys that may have some potential, depending on the circumstances, is ex-Vietnam veterans against the war. Guy from Massachusetts. Carey. He's got money. Yeah, he's got money. So, that could be kind of a shitstorm there if he gets involved. I don't know if they'll get behind him. I think, for example, all of this that came out about Bob Kerrey.
Okay, but are you? I hope you're not suggesting this because let me see. Are you suggesting that there might be some hope for the system that we have if somebody like Bob Kerrey gets elected president? Do you think he would fundamentally change the direction the nation is going? About the things that matter.
What I'm talking about is this narrow thing about the oil patch boys and the little schemes they've got going over there. I don't think he's as tied into the Saudis under the oil patch as the Bush.
That's
and
true.
all those connections.
And so what we're talking about then is Len's 2 steps back.
Well, we're talking about maybe putting off.
A day of reckoning.
Yeah. Which looks good at this point.
Well, isn't that what you're trying to do, Chris, in some way?
Be honest, no. No, I don't do things like that anymore. I'm not that naive. I'm not taking 2 steps back. I'm taking 2 more steps
Well,
forward.
that's not what I meant.
But what I'm trying to do is just take one last run at this thing and explain what's really going on the way it's going on at a time that when, the book that I've just written will become pure history in a few years. People are going to read it and they're going to go, well, how the fuck did he know that? And then I'll be able to say things and people might listen. years from now.
Oh, that it's already happened.
Yeah, because, I figure, you and I know something, Kathy, that most people don't know. American people aren't gonna wake up until they're burying their dead. The women in this country won't wake up until they're burying their children. All they give a shit about is money, cars, and homes. So they're not gonna wake up until the shit really hits the fan. Now, if I do my work right, and I'm not too old and craggy, I should be in a better position years down the road that they'll say, well, maybe we should listen to him this time because just look how darn right he was here. But right now, when I'm speaking, most people, because I've been banned for 5 years in the country with radio, a lot of people have never even heard of me. I mean, these three guys showed up, they're all Seattle and activists. They didn't know who the hell I was. First time they ever heard me was on Mike Siegel last Tuesday. I've been in Seattle 14 years doing this. We used to pull 1,000 people. This is the first time they ever heard of me. What's the first time you ever heard of me? You had Andy right here.
Tuesday. Yeah, on the Mike Siegel.
There it is.
We've only been in the area for 4 years, so.
Okay, but I've been on radio all over the country. Jim Bohannon, CNN, C-SPAN, Fox News,
Jim
LA
Bohannon
Right.
can't get you on the Larry King show?
Jim Bohannon has interviewed me 35 times. I was a regular. I was the first guest he put on live in D.C. to rebut Bush's terrorism speech, September 20th. But after I rebutted it, that's the last we ever heard of Jim Bohannon.
Which is also available.
Which is also available on No, see, I know that some of what I'm saying, will bother some people. I know it doesn't bother clients anymore. But, I've got almost 25 years experience, 18 years hardcore in the media. And what I'm talking about is from that experience. The shift that took place has been a paradigm shift. It's been enormous. Like plates, an earthquake. And we can thank Ross Perot for a big chunk of it. Ross Perot. If we'd gotten Bush Sr. again, the whole country was afraid of him. The whole country was unifying in different movements to oppose George Bush Sr. When Bill Clinton came along, nobody believed Bush Sr. could be defeated. He looked like the tyrant that he was. I couldn't keep from getting interviewed. I got interviewed everywhere because the whole country was scared shitless of George Sr. Nobody embraced Clinton. No. Thank you, Ross.
Lots of Bush Jr. He's not that big of Bush
I think they want to, it's like they want to be wannabes, you said there's a level of businesses down here, there's a level that we do business, and people down here, if they align themselves with Bush, they're like they're wannabes, they're going to be part of the system.
They think it's going to rub off. Well, that was definitely what they were doing with Ross Perot. When everybody thought they could vote for Perot, they thought somehow that his billions would trickle down to the electoral process. That is what they thought. I remember they did. They thought if Ross Perot is to be president, I'll get more money, I'll get higher wages. He'll fix the economy. What are you talking about? He doesn't want to be president. He just wants to take out Bush.
It was the charts and graphs.
Huh? It was. It truly was. They all sat back and said, "Oh, dang, if he's got charts and graphs, he must be very smart." I'm not sure, to be honest. I'm not sure. Okay, we're winding it up now, so disclaimer. This is where, Jason, you can turn off the tape or just go like this. So they don't hear what I'm saying. I'm not sure America should be safe right now. Maybe I've read too much Friedrich Nietzsche, but maybe it's time that we kick it off the cliff. But, I'm not sure it should be safe. I think it should go to hell in a handbasket, go to shit. We should have wars and revolution and bloodshed in the street. Then maybe these next couple of generations will wake up. What else is going to wake them up? Nothing's waking them up. I've been out here 25 years, I'm burned out. And I don't see anybody willing to step up here and do what I'm doing right now. They'd like to be popular like Noam Chomsky. He's very popular. Be well liked. He's a good moderate man. He's Jewish, you know. He's a friend of people.
I never thought of Noam Chomsky as a mainstream popular now.
He is terribly popular with the right people. His book's a bestseller. His little paperback pamphlet is a little bestseller. I got my book's been banned in bookstores. No, he's popular. But the people that matter, they won't listen to me. He can pull thousands of people at the universities. I can't. I can't get out of the
He
university.
uses all both sides.
That's right.
He's friends with the liberals, so.
That's right.
Damn,
No, but the far right likes him too. The far right likes Chomsky too, because he's still saying some things they like. But he says them in ways that, you know, he doesn't really offend. You know, he doesn't call himself the establishment critic for anything. He's the establishment's critic. Their critic. The only critic. The establishment's critic. Not a critic of the establishment. That's all I'm saying.
I'm working on it.
It's one of those known unknowns, or unknown unknowns. There are also known unknown knowns. And if you know enough of the unknowns, some of the unknowns become known.
I saw his parking spaces.
No. What?
That was,
I
that
saw
was
his
neat to
parking
see him.
Noam Chomsky?
I only saw his parking space, Julie saw him.
It's no.
Probably busy putting a bogus handicap parking sign on his rear view mirror.
Oh no, the parking space is empty